The phone rang just after midnight. Elon Musk, sitting alone in his dimly lit office, glanced at the screen. The name on the display was one he'd seen more times than he cared to count: NASA Command Center. The urgency of the call hit him immediately. He quickly answered, his voice sharp despite the late hour. "Elon," came the voice of NASA's lead engineer, Dr. Rebecca Hayes. "We have a serious problem. The Seraphim mission is in jeopardy. The astronauts are in grave danger." Musk's heart skipped a beat. He knew the Seraphim mission well, a cutting-edge spacecraft, carrying a highly skilled crew to a remote space station orbiting Mars. It was a mission he had supported heavily, using his SpaceX technology to help get it off the ground. The astronauts were his friends, his colleagues. And now, something had gone terribly wrong. "What's happening?" Musk's voice was steady, but inside, panic was beginning to rise. He had helped build the future of space exploration, but now that future was hanging by a thread. They've lost communication with Earth. Their life support systems are failing, and they've been drifting off course for hours, Dr. Hayes continued, her voice tense. Their oxygen supply is almost gone, and their power levels are critically low. We're trying everything, but they're running out of time. Musk stood up, pacing back and forth in his office. The space program was his dream, the one thing that had kept him awake at night. But this was different. He had never imagined something like this happening. The weight of the situation hit him hard. A crew of astronauts, human lives, were hanging in the balance. The mission, the very future of space exploration, could all come crashing down in an instant. The thought was unbearable. "How much time do they have left?" Musk asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Less than 24 hours, Hayes replied. "If we don't act now, they'll be lost." Musk clenched his jaw, a fire igniting within him. He couldn't stand the thought of failing. He couldn't let them die out there. He had the technology, the resources, and the will to act. He wasn't about to let humanity's progress in space be snuffed out because of a technical malfunction. "I'll do it," he said, his voice firm, more resolute than it had ever been. "We're going to save them. I'll send the rescue mission." Dr. Hayes was silent for a moment. "Are you sure?" "The risks are." "I don't care about the risks," Musk interrupted. "I'm doing this. They're my responsibility. We can't let them die out there." His mind raced through the possibilities. Musk knew that if he was going to save the astronauts, it would have to be done quickly. The spacecraft had to be recovered in less than a day, time was running out. But there was one major issue: NASA's rescue missions weren't designed to handle something of this scale. No one had ever planned for a rescue mission this far into deep space. And yet, the mission had to be launched, and fast. His gaze fell on the desk in front of him, where a model of his latest SpaceX spacecraft sat, its sleek design a testament to his vision for the future. He could do this. It would take everything he had, but Musk was known for going to extremes when something mattered to him. This mission mattered. The astronauts mattered. He would use every ounce of his resources to pull them back from the brink. Musk opened a secure communication line and called the SpaceX control room. The room was bustling with activity as engineers, technicians, and scientists worked tirelessly around the clock. It was just a few days before a major launch, but now they had a new priority. "Get me the chief engineer, now," Musk ordered. Within moments, Jim Allen, SpaceX's chief engineer, was on the line. His face was grim. "Elon, we've seen the reports. This is bad. I'm sending a rescue mission," Musk said, cutting straight to the point. "I want everything ready in the next 8 hours. We're going to get them back." Jim stared at him for a moment, as though weighing the enormity of the task. Then he nodded. "We'll need to overhaul the rescue module. The tech wasn't designed for long-range rescue missions. It'll take some modifications. Do whatever it takes." "I want that module ready," Musk said, his voice unwavering. "And we'll need a crew," Jim added. "It's not just about getting the ship there, we'll need pilots and technicians who can operate the craft once it reaches the astronauts." Musk took a deep breath. "I'll find the crew. You focus on the tech." As the line went dead, Musk turned his attention to the next task. His mind whirred, rapidly running through the personnel who could be trusted to make this mission happen. There was no time for mistakes, no time for hesitation. He quickly got on the phone with a few key people, engineers, specialists, and even some astronauts who could serve as part of the rescue crew. He needed people who could handle pressure, who could think on their feet when everything went wrong. He had one shot at this, and he wasn't about to fail. But even as he organized the team and the mission, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of his mind. The Seraphim mission wasn't just about saving a crew, it was a critical step toward future human expansion into deep space. If this rescue failed, it would set back human space exploration by years, if not decades. The pressure weighed heavily on him, but Musk wasn't one to back down from a challenge. In the meantime, NASA's teams scrambled to maintain communication with the astronauts, offering them what little support they could. Musk listened intently as NASA's command center updated him on the situation. The astronauts had begun to lose consciousness from the lack of oxygen. Time was slipping away. Elon paced around the room, watching the clock tick down. His team was scrambling to complete the modifications on the rescue ship, but even as they worked, the situation seemed to be growing dire. Every minute counted. He stopped at the window, staring out into the vast darkness of space. The stars twinkled like tiny pinpricks in the infinite black. It felt like a reminder of just how small humanity was in the grand scheme of things. But that same darkness held the promise of discovery, the promise of pushing past boundaries. He wouldn't let that promise be shattered. Not on his watch. "Let's go make history," Musk muttered under his breath, before turning back toward his team. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The Seraphim mission was more than just a technological feat, it was a symbol of everything humanity had hoped to achieve in the stars. The crew on board was handpicked from the finest minds and the bravest souls, each one representing a different facet of human determination. Now, as the spacecraft floated aimlessly in the vast emptiness of space, each member of the crew struggled in their own way to hold on to the fading thread of hope. Captain Jack Taylor stood at the helm of the Seraphim, his face a mask of concentration. He was a seasoned astronaut, veteran of multiple missions, including the first crewed flight to Mars. But despite his extensive experience, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was different. Something about it felt more personal. He'd always been a man of few words, but this time, the pressure was unbearable. Jack had joined NASA when he was just a young man, full of ambition and dreams of exploring the unknown. He had always been driven by a deep desire to push the boundaries of what was possible. But in recent years, those dreams had become tinged with regret. The mission to Mars had been his last great success, but it had also left him with scars that weren't just physical, but emotional. He had lost friends on that mission, people he had promised to protect, and it haunted him. He had come to the realization that his role in space exploration wasn't just about pushing humanity forward, it was about protecting those who stood beside him. And now, as he looked out the viewport of the Seraphim, knowing that time was running out for his crew, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his responsibility. Captain Taylor's second-in-command, Emma Hernandez, was the youngest member of the crew, but she had the heart of someone twice her age. Emma had been on a fast track to become one of the leading astronauts of her generation. She had grown up on the outskirts of Los Angeles, dreaming of the stars as a child. Her family had supported her, but it wasn't always easy. Emma knew the struggles of trying to prove herself in a world that was still not quite ready for women to lead in fields like space exploration. She had always pushed herself harder than anyone else, determined to show that she could be just as capable, just as strong, as any man. Her dedication had earned her a place on the Seraphim mission, but the isolation of space had begun to wear on her. She had learned to compartmentalize her emotions during her training, but being so far from Earth, knowing that her loved ones were watching from below, was different. The weight of knowing she might never see them again was suffocating. Still, she held on to the hope that she would make it home, that the mission would succeed, and she would stand proudly in front of her family and friends, a hero. But as the days passed, her hope began to flicker. And then there was Liam Zhao, the mission's youngest astronaut, the rookie who had barely completed his training before being thrust into the high-stakes mission of a lifetime. Liam was brilliant, no doubt about it. He had a knack for solving complex problems, but his nerves had always been a bit of a weakness. As a child, Liam had always been terrified of flying. He'd been the kid who clung to his mother's hand during every takeoff, his stomach in knots. It wasn't until he was older that he realized the true beauty of the sky and the stars, but by then, the fear had been ingrained. Space had terrified him in the beginning, but his passion for science and discovery had overridden that fear. When NASA selected him for the Seraphim mission, he had felt like he was finally proving to everyone, especially himself, that he was capable. But in the quiet of space, with nothing but the endless void around him, the fear was creeping back. Liam wasn't sure how much longer he could keep his anxiety at bay. The pressure was mounting. Liam had always believed that the hardest part of being an astronaut was the science, the calculations, the repairs, the never-ending problems that required quick thinking. But the hardest part, he had come to realize, was the mental toll. Space was a place where you were completely alone with your thoughts, with no distractions. And the isolation was the cruelest part of all. His thoughts always seemed to drift to his family, the ones he hadn't seen in months, the ones who had watched him launch from the ground, holding their breath as the rocket ascended into the sky. His mother had cried, his father had given him a silent nod of approval. But now, as the darkness of space seemed to swallow them whole, Liam couldn't help but think he might never see them again. The Seraphim was more than just a ship to these astronauts, it was their home, their sanctuary in the void. Yet, in the past few hours, that sanctuary had begun to feel like a prison. The failure of the life support systems, the loss of communication with Earth, the malfunctioning equipment, it was as though the universe itself had turned against them. Back on Earth, as the rescue mission was being planned, Jack, Emma, and Liam were unaware of the efforts being made on their behalf. They were doing everything they could to stay conscious, to keep each other alive. But as the hours passed, the oxygen supply continued to dwindle, and the likelihood of survival diminished with every breath they took. Jack did his best to maintain control of the situation, trying to keep Emma and Liam focused. He could see the fear in their eyes, the hopelessness starting to creep in. But he refused to let them give up. Not on his watch. "Stay with me, both of you," Jack said, his voice steady despite the increasing urgency of their situation. "We've faced worse before, we can do this. Just hold on a little longer." Emma nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What's the plan, Captain? Are we going to make it back?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He didn't have a plan. He was too focused on keeping them alive, on staying calm. The truth was, they were running out of time, and deep down, Jack knew it. But he couldn't let the fear take over. Not now. Not when they were so close to the edge. "We'll make it," Jack said, though even to himself, his words sounded more like a prayer than a promise. He could feel the weight of the silence around them, the crushing pressure of space, and the gnawing doubt that maybe, just maybe, this time they wouldn't make it. Somewhere, far below them on Earth, Elon Musk was already putting plans into motion to make sure they did. Time was ticking. The Seraphim mission had entered a critical phase. The astronauts were barely hanging on. Oxygen levels continued to drop, and with each passing moment, their chances of survival shrank. The once gleaming spacecraft now felt like a lifeless tomb, its walls echoing the silent cries of those trapped inside. Back on Earth, Elon Musk was working tirelessly, directing his teams at SpaceX and collaborating with NASA. The gravity of the situation settled over him like a heavy weight. He had been to the edge of space before, but this was different. This was personal. These astronauts, Jack, Emma, and Liam, were not just faceless figures in a report. They were individuals who had trusted him, who had believed in the technology he had helped create. And now, they were out there, in the vast nothingness of space, fighting for their lives. Musk sat in his war room, his eyes scanning the glowing monitors, watching engineers and scientists scramble to put together a plan. He could see the stress on their faces, the tension in the air. The spaceport, usually a place of excitement and anticipation, had become a pressure cooker of anxiety. There was no time to waste. "We've got one shot at this," Musk muttered under his breath as he surveyed the blueprints of the rescue mission. "We can't afford to fail." SpaceX's engineers were working around the clock to modify the Starship for a rescue operation. The modifications were complex, requiring unprecedented adaptations to its systems to ensure it could make the long journey to the Seraphim and bring the crew home. Space travel wasn't like launching a regular rocket, this was a deep space rescue. The spacecraft needed to be able to travel farther, faster, and sustain life support systems for longer than ever before. Elon's mind raced as he thought about the risks involved. If the Starship wasn't prepared in time, if the systems failed, it would be a catastrophic loss. Not just for the astronauts, but for humanity's future in space. The entire world was watching. "You're sure the modifications are going to work?" Musk asked, his voice sharp as he addressed Jim Allen, SpaceX's chief engineer. Jim looked up from the terminal, his face drawn. "We've pushed the limits of the Starship's design. It's uncharted territory. The life support system modifications are the most critical part. If the crew doesn't make it, the Starship will never have time to reach them." Musk nodded grimly. The odds were slim, but there was no other choice. "We're not backing down. Keep pushing." Meanwhile, at the NASA Command Center, the situation was just as dire. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, head of the mission, was coordinating with her team of engineers and scientists. The atmosphere in the room was tense, with everyone working under the crushing weight of a single, overriding thought: save them. "Commander Taylor, do you copy?" Dr. Hayes spoke into the comms, her voice tinged with the same urgency that Musk had heard earlier. There was no response. She glanced at the monitor. The communication link had failed yet again. She knew the astronauts were still alive, barely, but they were losing vital connection with Earth. Every second counted, and the silence from the Seraphim was deafening. "We're getting their life support back online," one of the NASA engineers said, his eyes scanning the data. "It's a temporary fix, but it should give them more time." "Good," Dr. Hayes replied, her mind already working on the next problem. "We can't afford to waste any time. Prepare for the launch window with SpaceX. The rescue mission needs to be on its way in the next few hours." Back in the Seraphim, Captain Jack Taylor stared at the flickering screens in front of him. The red warning lights, the low hum of failing systems, it was like a constant reminder that time was slipping away. Emma and Liam were huddled together, trying to conserve energy, but the fear was beginning to creep into their bones. Jack couldn't let it show, but he could feel the cold grip of terror wrapping around his chest. "What do we do, Captain?" Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. "We can't keep this up for much longer." Jack's jaw tightened as he looked at the oxygen levels. The tank was depleting faster than he had anticipated. He had no way of knowing when the next rescue mission would arrive, and that uncertainty was gnawing at him. They couldn't wait any longer. "Just hold on, Emma," Jack said, his voice as steady as he could make it. "We'll make it. Help's on the way." But even as he spoke, a tiny voice in the back of his mind whispered, "What if help doesn't come?" The thought was terrifying, but he had to keep that fear buried. He wasn't going to let it consume him. Liam shifted nervously in his seat. He had been quiet for the past few hours, his gaze glued to the emergency lights blinking in front of him. He was trying not to panic, but the truth was, the fear was almost overwhelming. His mind kept racing, thinking of his family, his mother, his father, his little sister. What would they say when they found out that he had never made it back? He swallowed hard, trying to push the thoughts away, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. "How long do you think until the rescue team gets here?" Liam asked, his voice almost a whisper. Jack didn't answer right away. He didn't know. And lying to him wouldn't make it any easier. "We don't know, Liam. But we have to stay calm. We'll make it through this." The tension in the cockpit was palpable. Emma looked at Jack, her eyes searching his face for any sign of hope. But there was nothing in his expression that suggested they were out of danger. They were in the dark, floating helplessly in the void. Back on Earth, Elon Musk's team was working at lightning speed. The Starship was nearly ready. Jim Allen's team had made significant progress, and despite the technical challenges, they were close to launching. But there was no guarantee it would be enough. If the Seraphim was too far off course, if the systems on the spacecraft couldn't be patched in time, they might never reach them. Musk leaned forward, staring at the screen in front of him. The launch window was closing, and it felt like everything was on the line. "This is it," he said to himself, more to reassure his own nerves than anyone else. He turned to the engineers. "Let's make it count." As the final countdown to launch began, Musk's heart raced. There was no turning back now. The clock was ticking, and the lives of 3 astronauts were hanging in the balance. The world was watching. And in the depths of space, Jack, Emma, and Liam were praying that they weren't too late. The countdown had begun. Back in the command center at SpaceX, Elon Musk stood with his arms crossed, watching the launch sequence unfold on the massive screens before him. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the air conditioning that hummed softly around the room. Every inch of his body felt tense, his mind racing with every potential outcome, every possible failure. The weight of the mission rested on him, and he knew the risks involved. There was no margin for error. "Starship is ready for launch," Jim Allen, the chief engineer, announced, his voice carrying through the room. The time had come to launch the rescue mission. "Good. Launch in 5 minutes," Musk replied, his voice steady, but the anxiety was there beneath the calm exterior. As the clock ticked down, Musk took one last glance at the faces of the engineers and scientists in the room. Every one of them was focused, their eyes glued to the monitors. The gravity of the situation had made even the most seasoned engineers appear slightly frazzled. The pressure was immense. If this mission failed, it wouldn't just be another failed rescue, it would be a crushing blow to humanity's dreams of space exploration. On the Seraphim, Jack, Emma, and Liam were still battling the elements of their own survival. They had managed to restore some of the life support systems temporarily, but it was a fragile hope. Oxygen levels were at dangerous lows, and even with the systems barely holding together, the crew's energy was draining. Their bodies were starting to rebel against them, the lack of sleep, the constant stress, and the fear eating away at their endurance. Jack stared at the dimming lights in the cockpit, his mind focused on one thought: hold on. "Emma, Liam," he said quietly, turning to face his crew. "We've been through worse. Just remember that. If we stick together, we can do this. Help is on the way. We just have to survive long enough to see it." Liam nodded, though the fear was evident in his eyes. He didn't want to show it, but it was hard to ignore. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his family. They were his driving force to keep going. But now, as the minutes bled into hours, his hope began to wane. It wasn't that he didn't trust the mission, it was the waiting, the uncertainty, that gnawed at him. "Do you think they'll make it?" Emma asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "The rescue team, I mean." Jack didn't answer immediately. He had no way of knowing if they'd make it in time. He could only hope. They'll make it. They have to. Back on Earth, SpaceX's Starship sat on the launch pad, engines roaring as the rocket prepared for takeoff. The moment Elon Musk had been waiting for had arrived. His heart pounded in his chest as the countdown ticked down to 0. 3, 2, 1. Launch, Jim Allen said, pressing the final command. With a deafening roar, the Starship shot into the sky, a trail of flame and smoke following behind it as it broke through the atmosphere. The entire room fell into a stunned silence, watching the rocket ascend higher and higher into the dark sky. Musk's grip tightened on the edge of the desk. His eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching the rocket become a mere dot against the infinite canvas of space. Starship is in orbit, Jim Allen confirmed moments later. We're en route to the Seraphim. Elon didn't allow himself a moment of relief. The hardest part was still ahead, the journey itself. The Starship was designed to travel far and fast, but the Seraphim was not exactly within easy reach. They would need to make several course adjustments, and any one of those adjustments could be the difference between success and disaster. The window was narrow, the stakes high. It was a race against time. Above the Earth, the Seraphim continued its slow drift through the void. Inside, the crew was still trying to keep the ship's fragile systems intact. Emma had taken up the task of monitoring their dwindling resources, her face pale but resolute. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up, she said quietly to Jack, who was working on the ship's console, trying to reroute power to the oxygen systems. We just need to hold on a little longer, Jack replied, his voice barely above a whisper. But even as he said those words, he couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was playing some kind of cruel joke. They were so close to being saved, yet so far. They had no way of knowing if the rescue mission was even on track, let alone if they would make it in time. Liam stood by the viewport, staring out into the dark expanse of space. He knew the others were doing everything they could to survive, but he felt helpless. His eyes were heavy, the exhaustion gnawing at him. His thoughts drifted to the countless calculations he had made in the past. His mind, usually so sharp, was now foggy. The coldness of space outside seemed to seep in through the walls, chilling him to the bone. Suddenly, there was a hum, faint but steady. Jack, Emma, and Liam all looked toward the console as the systems flickered. Could it be? Was it really happening? Jack, Emma said, her voice filled with disbelief, look at the readings. Are we getting a signal? Jack squinted at the screen, his heart racing. The signal was faint but unmistakable, the rescue team was on its way. Hold on. Jack shouted, the first real sense of hope he had felt in hours rushing through him. They're coming. They're really coming. But as the signal came through, something strange happened. The flickering on the screen intensified. Jack quickly examined the console, confusion growing. There was no mistake, they were receiving a signal from Earth, but there was something else in the data. A distortion, an interference. Something's wrong, Jack muttered, reaching for the controls. I don't like this. As the warning lights flickered and the distortion on the screen grew stronger, an unsettling realization swept over him. Could the rescue mission be compromised? Were they too far off course? Or worse, was it a trap? There was no time to waste. He had to act fast. Emma, get ready, Jack barked. Liam, help me stabilize the communication systems. We need to make sure that signal stays clear, or we're done for. The tension in the Seraphim was palpable. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the frantic tapping of keyboards and the whir of machinery. But in the quiet of space, an unsettling feeling began to settle in. The crew had no idea what awaited them in the vast expanse, but they were about to find out, soon. The Seraphim creaked as the tension in its fragile systems continued to build. The faint hum of the emergency generators was the only sound that accompanied the astronauts as they worked feverishly to stay alive. The distorted signal was growing stronger, louder, and the familiar hum of their spacecraft was now interspersed with sudden bursts of static. Jack, Emma, and Liam stared at the flickering console, the once distant hope of rescue now clouded with fear. "Something's wrong, Captain," Liam said, his voice barely a whisper as he studied the data scrolling on his screen. "That signal, it doesn't feel right." Jack nodded, his pulse quickening as he read the same disturbing patterns of interference. The data was corrupted, fragments of an unknown frequency mixed with the rescue signal. The hope that had flared within him moments before began to flicker like a dying ember. This wasn't just a technical malfunction, it felt deliberate. Someone was tampering with their communications. "Is it possible someone else is interfering with the signal?" Emma asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Jack took a deep breath. "It could be. It's the only explanation." "Should we respond?" Liam asked, his hands shaking slightly as he hovered over the communications system. "We can't," Jack said firmly. "Not yet. Not until we're sure of what we're dealing with." Outside the Seraphim, the darkness of space stretched endlessly, indifferent to the fragile lives aboard the spacecraft. The three astronauts, once filled with resolve and courage, now felt as small as they had ever been. There was nothing more terrifying than the unknown, and they were facing it head-on. What was out there? Who had found them, and why? As the minutes passed, the distortion on the console reached a deafening level. Jack's eyes darted to the main control panel, where a sudden surge of data filled the screen. It was a full-spectrum transmission, a burst of high-frequency interference that forced Jack's hands to fly across the keys, trying to regain control. "Jack, what is that?" Emma asked, her voice full of dread. "I don't know," Jack replied, his hands shaking as he tried to isolate the signal. "But whatever it is, it's not good. It's not coming from Earth." Liam turned to face the cockpit window, his heart racing as the stars outside blurred, replaced by a strange, shifting light, a strange red glow far in the distance. The glow flickered in and out, like a beacon or a warning. "Is that something moving toward us?" Liam asked, his voice thick with fear. "Something huge?" Jack froze. He looked out of the window, his heart skipping a beat as his mind processed what Liam had pointed out. The red glow in the distance was unmistakable, it wasn't a natural phenomenon. The object was moving. Fast. "It's a ship," Jack murmured. His voice faltered, fear creeping in. "And it's coming for us." On Earth, in the SpaceX Mission Control Center, Elon Musk was staring at the monitors, hands clenched tightly on the edge of the desk. The Starship was en route, but the distance was immense. There were still hours left before the rescue team could reach the Seraphim, and Musk had just received an alarming update. There was a disturbance in the signal, and his heart sank as he saw the interference patterns. Something had gone wrong. They couldn't hear the astronauts anymore. "Jim, what's happening?" Musk asked, his voice calm but laced with urgency. Jim Allen, the chief engineer, was already on it. He was furiously typing, trying to pull together any data that would explain the signal disruption. "We're trying to isolate it, but the interference is unlike anything we've encountered before. The Seraphim is still on course, but we've lost communication." Musk's pulse quickened. The Seraphim had no idea what was happening. They were drifting further into danger, and he could do nothing to help them in that moment. "Keep trying to make contact," he said, though he knew deep down it was a long shot. He turned to the screen where the Starship was traveling toward space at unimaginable speeds. The clock was ticking. He had no idea what lay ahead for the astronauts, but one thing was certain, their lives, and the future of humanity's journey into space, rested on this moment. Back on the Seraphim, the red light from the approaching ship was growing stronger, and Jack, Emma, and Liam were frozen, the weight of uncertainty and fear crushing them. They had no idea who, or what, was out there, but they had no time to wait and find out. "We need to make contact," Jack said urgently, his hands flying over the console. If we don't do something now, we might not survive this. Emma nodded, her fear palpable but buried beneath the surface. She had trained for moments like this, but nothing had prepared her for the terror that gripped her chest in that moment. What were they facing? Liam stared out the window, his breath caught in his throat. Jack, it's getting closer. The red glow was now unmistakable, it was a ship, and it wasn't coming to save them. It was coming to destroy them. Prepare for emergency procedures, Jack ordered. We need to get the life support back online and create as much distance from that thing as possible. But it was too late. The red light burst forward, and a deafening roar shook the Seraphim. The ship shuddered violently, throwing the crew to the floor. The lights flickered, and the console screens erupted with warning signals. What the hell just happened? Liam yelled as he scrambled to hold on to the nearest control panel. His heart raced in his chest. It's them, whoever they are. Jack shouted back. He had no idea who was attacking them, but it was clear now that their lives were in imminent danger. The interference on the communications console reached a fever pitch, and for a split second, the red glow outside flickered and disappeared. It was replaced by the horrifying sound of a blast, the unmistakable whine of energy weapons hitting the ship's hull. The Seraphim jolted again, and the crew braced for impact. We're taking fire. Emma shouted, her voice cracking with panic. We need to make it to the escape pod, Jack ordered, pushing himself to his feet. The terror he felt was a deep, gnawing panic, but he forced himself to act. There was no time for hesitation. The crew scrambled to prepare the escape pod. As they did, the Seraphim shuddered again, its power systems flickering. Jack felt a rush of guilt. He had led them into this mess. He had promised them safety. And now, it was slipping away. Suddenly, the intercom system buzzed to life, and a voice came through, distorted, cold, and harsh. This is not your space anymore. You have trespassed, and now you will pay the price. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. They were not just under attack, they were being hunted. For the first time since the mission began, the cold emptiness of space felt like a prison. And they were trapped inside it, with no way out. The Seraphim continued to shudder under the impact of the enemy's fire. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the communication system crackled, the voice from the intercom still ringing in his ears, "This is not your space anymore. You have trespassed, and now you will pay the price." His mind raced. Who were these people, or whatever they were? And how did they find them in the vastness of space? Jack, what the hell is going on? Emma's voice broke through his thoughts, laced with fear. We've been attacked, Jack said, his voice as calm as he could muster, though every muscle in his body was on high alert. He quickly surveyed the dimly lit cockpit, trying to assess the damage. The fire was coming from the unknown ship, its weapons were powerful enough to cause significant harm to their hull, but the Seraphim had been designed to withstand attacks. The key now was getting to the escape pod before it was too late. We need to get to the pod, now, Jack ordered. We don't have time to fix the systems. The hull is breached, life support will fail soon. Move. The crew scrambled, adrenaline pumping through their veins. Liam was already heading toward the emergency hatch, trying to open it. The escape pod was their only hope now, but there was no guarantee that they could reach it in time. A loud bang echoed through the hull of the Seraphim, and Jack was thrown forward, barely catching himself on the console. His vision blurred for a moment as the ship bucked under another attack. Jack! We need to go now. Emma shouted, her voice desperate. Her face was pale, but there was a fire in her eyes. She was terrified, yes, but she wasn't about to go down without a fight. Jack gritted his teeth and nodded. Liam. Open the pod door, now. Liam's hands moved like lightning, and the hatch to the escape pod slid open with a hiss. The three astronauts filed inside, each one moving quickly, their breath shallow with fear. Jack was the last to enter, his eyes scanning the cabin one last time. The Seraphim was slowly falling apart, the steady hum of the systems giving way to the sporadic beeping of critical failure alarms. "This is it," Liam muttered under his breath, as he strapped himself into one of the seats. The pod was small, but it was equipped to keep them alive long enough to reach Earth or the nearest station. Jack and Emma took their seats, strapping in as well. The weight of the situation crashed down on him in that moment. His hands trembled as he activated the launch sequence. The pod's thrusters ignited, and with a violent jolt, they were ripped away from the Seraphim, escaping the onslaught of fire from the enemy ship. The escape pod shot into space, the vast nothingness swallowing them up. For a brief, fleeting moment, the terror of their situation seemed to fall away, replaced with the crushing silence of space. The Seraphim was still visible on their monitors, though it was now a dying ship, its lights flickering as it tumbled through space. It wouldn't survive much longer, and neither would they if they didn't make it to safety. Back on Earth, the control room at SpaceX was in chaos. Elon Musk had been watching the mission's progress in real time, but now, the data feed from the Seraphim had cut out completely. The last thing they had heard was that the crew had been under attack, and the ship's systems had failed. The communication line went dead, leaving Musk with a sinking feeling in his gut. "Jim, what's the situation?" Musk asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "We lost contact." "Where are they?" Jim Allen, the chief engineer, was working quickly, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he analyzed the incoming data. The starship was on course, but it was still hours away. Musk's stomach churned. "We've lost communication with the Seraphim entirely," Jim said grimly. "And we're detecting some kind of interference from an unknown source. It's not just the Seraphim, the starship's sensors are picking up anomalous signals as well. We can't be sure what we're dealing with. But, it's bad, Elon." Musk's jaw clenched. He had promised the astronauts that they would make it in time. The idea of failure gnawed at him, but he refused to let the fear paralyze him. "We can't turn back. The starship has to keep going. We're their only chance." Back in the escape pod, Jack tried to steady his breathing as the pod hurtled through space. The blaring alarms around him made it hard to think clearly. Emma was looking at the control panel, her hands trembling as she tried to get a read on their trajectory. "Jack, we're on course, but it's going to take us hours to reach Earth at this speed. The Seraphim won't make it that long. And this pod. I don't think we have enough supplies for the full journey," Emma said, her voice quivering with fear. Jack's mind raced. He had to keep it together for the crew. They couldn't afford to panic. "We'll make it," he said, though his voice didn't carry the same conviction he'd hoped for. They were in serious trouble. Their only hope was that SpaceX would pull through with the starship. As the pod continued to drift through the cold, silent void of space, Jack glanced out the small viewport. The stars shone faintly in the distance, but beyond them, everything felt empty. Was this it? Was this how it ended? Would the unknown force that attacked them find a way to destroy the pod as well? Suddenly, Liam spoke, his voice breaking through the tension. "Do you think we'll make it? Back home, I mean." Jack glanced at him, his heart heavy. "We have to," he said firmly. "We're not giving up." Liam nodded but didn't respond, his eyes glued to the monitor. His fingers gripped the edge of the seat as if trying to hold on to whatever shred of hope was left. But then, another alarm blared. The escape pod jerked violently, and the crew was thrown against their harnesses. The acceleration was sharp and sudden. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the pod shook violently. "Not again!" Emma cried, eyes wide with terror. Jack quickly scrambled for the controls, but the pod's automatic systems had taken over. The trajectory was changing, they were being pulled toward something. "What the hell is happening?" Liam shouted. Outside the pod's viewport, a bright, pulsing light began to grow larger in the distance, growing closer with every passing second. "Not again, please," Jack whispered, his heart sinking into his stomach. The pod was being drawn toward a new threat. And this time, there would be no escape. The pod shook once again, violently this time, as its automated systems fought to maintain control. Jack's hands flew over the console, desperately trying to override the pod's navigation, but the systems were far too advanced, and too damaged. A deep, unsettling hum reverberated through the walls, vibrating the very frame of the escape pod. The bright pulsing light grew stronger, and the crew was pulled inexorably toward it. "Jack!" Emma screamed, her face pale with fear. "What's happening?" "We're being pulled in." Jack's mind raced, but in that moment, there was nothing he could do. "We're being dragged toward something powerful," he said, his voice low, strained. The light outside was no longer a distant speck, it filled the viewport entirely, an unearthly glow that seemed to warp the very fabric of space around it. The pod continued to accelerate, its systems unable to correct their course. It felt like they were falling into a gravitational trap, something enormous and unseen. The stars outside seemed to distort, bending in ways that Jack had only ever seen in theoretical physics books. His thoughts scrambled to catch up with the reality of the situation. "Is that a black hole?" Liam asked, his voice trembling. "Are we being sucked into a black hole?" Jack looked at the monitor, his heart sinking further. "It's not a black hole," he said, his voice tight with both fear and relief. "But it's something similar. A powerful gravitational anomaly, maybe even a ship or structure capable of bending space around it. Whatever it is, we're in its grip now." The lights in the pod flickered as the ship's systems tried, and failed, to stabilize. The sound of the engine's desperate thrusters roaring to life barely registered. It was hopeless. Then came the jolt. The pod lurched forward, its trajectory shifting at an impossibly steep angle. They were diving straight into the heart of this unknown force. Jack could feel his stomach twist with the sensation of falling, his body pressed back into the seat as the pod's momentum pushed them further into the unknown. The gravitational pull intensified, throwing the crew into a state of helplessness. The walls groaned in protest, straining under the stress. "We're going too fast," Emma shouted, struggling to keep her head against the seat. "We're going to crash." The communication system crackled to life, static drowning out the few words they could hear. "Do not," the voice was garbled, coming from the same source as before. The mysterious voice from earlier, now faint but unmistakably present. The pod plunged deeper. The pulsating light outside turned into a blinding, searing beam, engulfing the pod entirely. The warning lights flickered as the emergency systems failed one by one. Jack's heart raced. They were in the jaws of some otherworldly phenomenon, with no hope of escape. "Hold on!" Jack shouted as the pod's descent reached its peak. He clenched his hands around the console, his knuckles white. "We're going to have to ride this out." Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the pod's violent shaking ceased. Everything went still. The light outside dimmed, and the noise of the rushing wind and grinding metal stopped. The pod floated in eerie silence. For a moment, Jack dared to believe they had somehow passed through the worst of it. But as he glanced around the cabin, he saw Emma and Liam still strapped into their seats, eyes wide with disbelief and terror. The silence stretched on, almost suffocating in its weight. "Are we dead?" Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. Jack swallowed hard, but the words wouldn't come. His mind raced for an explanation, but the only thing that came to him was fear. He had no answers. Suddenly, the pod systems flickered back to life, the console lights flashing on, and the emergency alarms blared once more. The screen in front of Jack flashed with new information, a location. They weren't floating in empty space anymore. The pod had settled in a gravitational field, but it wasn't like anything they had encountered before. The readouts on the console indicated an immense structure, orbiting what appeared to be an artificial moon. Jack's eyes narrowed as he tried to comprehend the data. "This doesn't make sense," Jack muttered to himself, his mind racing to understand what they were seeing. "This is not anywhere near Earth or the Seraphim's path." "We're not alone," Emma said quietly, her voice breaking the silence. "Whatever pulled us in, it's a station, or a ship, it's too big to be just a structure." The thought hit Jack with the force of a tidal wave. They were in the presence of something that had been intentionally hidden. Whoever, or whatever, had attacked them and caused the catastrophe with the Seraphim was here. And now, they were stranded inside a space they couldn't even begin to understand. "Look at that," Liam said, pointing at the viewport. "There's something out there, moving. Something massive." Outside the pod, just beyond the shimmering surface of an artificial moon, enormous shapes drifted in space, ships, colossal structures, and stations that were so large they made the Seraphim look like a grain of sand. The sight was incomprehensible, too advanced and too alien to fully understand. "Should we go investigate?" Emma asked, her voice shaky. "We have no choice," Jack replied, his voice steady but filled with an underlying edge of fear. "This is the only way forward." Jack glanced at the readouts again. The pod had come to a complete stop, caught in the orbit of this massive structure. Whatever it was alive with activity. There were ships moving around the station, and from the distance, Jack could see strange, flickering lights, like communications signals or signals of warning. The realization hit Jack hard. They weren't just dealing with an alien force, they were in their territory now. This place wasn't abandoned. It was inhabited. And they were about to find out what that meant. "We have to get out of here," Emma said. "We have to find shelter. We don't know what kind of danger we're in." Jack nodded grimly. "We need to approach carefully. No sudden movements. We don't know what's out there, but it's clear they know we're here." The decision was made. Jack switched the pod systems over to manual control, cautiously guiding them toward the station in the distance. The massive ships around them seemed to watch as the tiny pod drifted toward the unknown, but no one made a move to stop them. "We're not alone in this," Liam said, his voice filled with awe and terror. "And we're about to meet the ones who brought us here." The pod crept forward, drifting closer to the ominous structure. The unknown forces that had attacked them earlier might still be watching, waiting for their next move. But Jack had no choice. They had come too far to turn back now. As they closed in on the massive station, Jack prepared himself for whatever lay ahead. The greatest unknown of their journey was just about to begin. The escape pod drifted through space, drawn inexorably toward the massive, looming structure that had once seemed so distant. The vast expanse of unknown ships and stations now filled their viewport, each one more imposing and strange than the last. Jack's grip tightened on the controls, his eyes scanning every inch of their surroundings. Every flicker of light, every shift in the dark expanse was a potential threat, and every second that passed without a clear understanding of their situation only added to the weight of their predicament. Liam stared out of the window, his breath shallow. "I can't believe this is happening," he muttered under his breath, his voice almost in disbelief. "I thought space was supposed to be empty, but this? This looks like a whole civilization. We're in the middle of something far beyond us," Emma whispered, her voice carrying a note of awe mixed with fear. She gazed at the massive structures in the distance, feeling small and insignificant in the shadow of such power. The ships and stations surrounding them were not like anything they had ever seen. Some were sleek and angular, built for speed and power, while others appeared ancient and massive, their surfaces covered in strange symbols and alien markings. "We need to stay focused," Jack said, trying to steady his nerves. "We don't know what kind of people, or beings, are here. Stay calm. Whatever happens, we need to stick together." As the pod continued its slow drift toward the station, Jack noticed something disturbing. Despite the sheer size of the structures around them, none of the ships seemed to be moving in a chaotic or uncoordinated manner. There was an order to the way they moved, like a well-oiled machine, as if they all understood a purpose Jack couldn't begin to grasp. They were not just floating aimlessly in space, they were part of something. Something much bigger. What if they don't want us here? Emma asked, breaking the silence, her voice low but tinged with anxiety. What if this is some kind of trap? Jack's eyes flicked to the control panel again, the blinking lights reflecting the tension in the pod. He swallowed hard. We have to find out what's going on. We need to make contact with whoever's in charge. The unknown structures loomed closer. They were nearing the edge of the largest station in the field, a hulking behemoth that seemed to be the heart of this entire system. Its surface was smooth, almost organic in design, yet it pulsed with strange lights that emanated from deep within. The station felt alive in a way that unnerved Jack. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but there was nowhere else to go. We'll make a pass around it, Jack said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that gnawed at his insides. If we don't find anything suspicious, we'll try to dock. If we don't make contact with anyone, we'll... A loud noise interrupted his words. It was a series of sharp, metallic clangs, followed by the sudden appearance of a massive, looming ship that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. It was enormous, dwarfing the pod, its sleek design almost too perfect to be anything but alien. It approached them with terrifying precision, and before Jack could react, a harsh voice crackled over the pod's intercom system. Identify yourselves, intruders. The voice was cold, mechanical, yet there was a tone of authority and warning in it. Jack froze, staring at the comm system in shock. Who are you? Jack demanded, his pulse quickening. What do you want with us? The voice didn't reply immediately. There was a brief silence, then, a hum filled the intercom, followed by a calm, almost emotionless response. We are the Draxians. You are in violation of our territory. You will be escorted to the station for further questioning. Jack felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The word Draxians sent a chill through his spine. He had never heard of them before, but the way they spoke, with such ease and authority, made it clear that this wasn't a first contact scenario. These beings were far beyond anything humanity had encountered. We didn't mean any harm, Jack said, his voice leveled despite the panic rising inside him. We're just lost. Our ship was attacked, and we had no choice but to escape. There was a brief pause on the other end, and for a moment, Jack thought they might not respond. But then, the voice returned, colder than before. You will be held accountable for your actions, human. Prepare for docking. Before Jack could say anything else, the pod was suddenly jolted by a force so strong it nearly threw them from their seats. The ship was pulling them toward the massive station at an alarming rate, the gravitational field of the station pulling them in like a spider capturing prey in its web. They had no control over the pod, and Jack could do nothing but brace for impact. The escape pod was gently, but forcefully, brought to a docking bay on the station's surface. The airlock hissed open, revealing a dark, metallic hallway illuminated by strange, flickering lights. For a moment, the world outside seemed to stand still. Jack, Emma, and Liam exchanged worried glances. They were about to face whatever the Draxians had in store for them, and there was no turning back now. As the pod settled into place, a series of doors along the walls slid open. Strange figures emerged, tall, with skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Their eyes were an unnatural shade of gold, glowing faintly, and their movements were smooth, almost fluid, as if they were gliding rather than walking. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he watched them approach. The beings were unlike anything he had ever seen. Their clothing was intricately designed, but it seemed to blend seamlessly with their bodies, as if they were part of the station itself. They stood in complete silence, their gaze fixed on the three astronauts. One of the Draxians stepped forward, his golden eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the humans. "Step out of the pod," he commanded. His voice was deep, resonant, and laced with authority. Jack hesitated for only a moment before unstrapping himself from his seat. He wasn't sure what awaited them, but one thing was clear: they were at the mercy of these beings. And right now, they had no choice but to comply. "Come on," he said to Emma and Liam, his voice steady despite the storm of fear raging inside him. "We have to go." Together, they stepped out of the pod, the cold, sterile air of the station biting at their skin. The Draxians stood silent, unmoving, as they led the astronauts down the long, dark corridor. Jack glanced at his teammates, both of them pale but determined. He didn't know what the Draxians wanted, or why they had been brought here, but one thing was clear: they weren't just visitors anymore. They were prisoners. And whatever was about to happen, they were about to learn that the Draxians were not a force to be trifled with. The unknown stretched out before them, dark, vast, and terrifying. The metallic hallway stretched ahead, its sterile, dimly lit corridors filled with an unsettling quiet. Jack, Emma, and Liam walked slowly, the clanging of their boots against the cold floor echoing ominously. The Draxians moved in perfect sync, gliding just a few steps ahead, their golden eyes fixed on the humans with an unsettling intensity. They didn't speak, but their presence alone was enough to make Jack's skin crawl. As they proceeded, the hallway seemed to narrow, the walls becoming increasingly ornate and intricate. Strange, alien symbols were etched into the metal, glowing faintly with an eerie, pulsating light. The deeper they went into the station, the more the feeling of being inside something alive grew. Jack couldn't shake the sensation that the very walls, the floors, and even the air around them were somehow sentient, watching them, judging them. Finally, they arrived at a large set of imposing doors, adorned with the same glowing symbols. The Draxian leader, the one who had first spoken to them, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he raised one of his hands. Without a word, the doors slowly slid open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The chamber was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. It was enormous, stretching far higher and deeper than the eyes could comprehend. The walls were covered with more of those strange symbols, and in the center of the room stood a massive, translucent structure, a kind of floating orb that seemed to pulse with energy. It radiated power, and the air hummed with an almost electric intensity. "This is the Chamber of Truth," the Draxian leader said, his voice reverberating through the chamber like a low growl. "Here, you will face the consequences of your actions." Jack felt a chill run down his spine as he glanced at the other two. They were just as unsettled, their faces pale and tight with fear. Emma's voice trembled as she spoke, her words barely a whisper. "What do you mean, consequences? We didn't do anything wrong." The Draxian leader turned to her, his golden eyes narrowing even further. "You trespassed into our territory. Your presence here is a violation. The penalty for such an act is severe." The words hung in the air, heavy with threat. Jack's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure what the Draxians were capable of, but one thing was clear: this wasn't going to end well unless they found a way out. The Draxians gestured for them to step forward into the center of the chamber. Without hesitation, the three astronauts obeyed, walking toward the glowing orb in the middle of the room. As they stepped closer, the orb pulsed brighter, its glow intensifying as if recognizing their presence. It hummed louder now, and Jack could feel a strange energy thrumming through the air. His heart raced as he glanced at Emma and Liam, who looked just as tense. The leader of the Draxians raised his hand once more, and the air around them shifted. A sudden, blinding light filled the chamber, and Jack instinctively shielded his eyes. When the light faded, they were no longer standing in the chamber. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by a vast expanse of nothingness, an infinite void, with no sense of direction, no ground beneath their feet. It was as if they had been transported into the depths of space itself. "Where are we?" Liam whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. "What is this place?" This is the interface, the Draxian leader's voice echoed from all directions, though no figure was in sight. It is here that the truth of your intentions will be revealed. Here, we will judge you. Before Jack could respond, the void before them flickered, and images began to materialize out of thin air. They were not static, they were scenes, moments in time, playing out before them as if they were memories. The first image was of Jack. He saw himself, a young boy, sitting on a swing in a park, laughing with his father. It was a memory he hadn't thought about in years. The scene shifted, and now he was watching his mother's face, filled with pride, as she pinned a badge on his chest, his first day at NASA. The memories kept coming, each one more intimate than the last, the day he first met Emma, the excitement of launching into space, the struggles of the long mission, and the devastating attack on the Seraphim. Jack felt his heart racing as the images kept coming. But something was off. The images began to twist, to distort. His memories were no longer his own, they were warped, manipulated. He saw himself yelling at Emma, blaming her for things that never happened. He saw himself giving up on the mission, abandoning his crew when they needed him the most. The memories were turning dark, a reflection of his deepest fears and insecurities. "Stop!" Jack shouted, stepping back, his hands shaking. "These aren't real." The Draxian leader's voice came again, colder this time. "These are the truths of your actions, Jack Carter. The choices you made, the lives you affected. This is the reality of who you are. Your actions have consequences." "Those aren't the choices I made," Jack said through gritted teeth, his voice shaking with anger. "You're manipulating this. These are lies." The void shifted, and now Emma and Liam were standing next to him, their faces filled with confusion and fear as they were drawn into the images. Emma's memories played out before her, the look of terror as she lost contact with her family, the moments when she had doubted herself, and the guilt that had plagued her ever since the attack. Liam's memories, too, were distorted, visions of failure, of watching helplessly as they couldn't stop the impending disaster, moments where he felt powerless. The three of them stood together in the middle of the void, facing the consequences of their deepest fears and regrets. It was as if the chamber of truth was holding up a mirror to their souls, forcing them to confront their darkest selves. "This is insane," Liam muttered, his voice full of disbelief. "This isn't real. We don't have to believe this." But the Draxian leader's presence was overwhelming. "You will face your truths. You cannot escape your actions. The judgment will be passed." Jack's mind raced. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't let these false memories define him or his team. They had come here for answers, not for judgment. And no matter how terrifying this experience was, they had to find a way to fight back. He glanced at Emma and Liam, their faces filled with a mix of fear and determination. They weren't alone. They had each other, and they weren't going to let the Draxians control their fates. "We have to fight this," Jack said, his voice strong. "This isn't the truth. These aren't our actions, not the real ones. We're not defined by our fears and regrets." Emma nodded, her eyes meeting his with an understanding. "We can't let them manipulate us." Liam took a deep breath. "We need to break free from this." Together, they stood tall in the face of their distorted memories, the false visions swirling around them. Jack felt something shift within him, something powerful, something that said no, they weren't going to be defined by their past mistakes. Not by these twisted visions. "We are not your prisoners," Jack said, his voice steady and defiant. And with that declaration, the chamber of truth began to tremble. The tremor in the chamber of truth intensified, sending waves of energy rippling through the void. Jack, Emma, and Liam stood firm, their feet planted solidly on nothingness, as the swirling illusions of distorted memories continued to distort and twist around them. The images had become sharper, more vivid, yet their power over the astronauts was waning. The more they resisted, the more the force pressing on them seemed to weaken. Jack's heart hammered in his chest as he focused, trying to clear his mind. The glowing orb at the center of the chamber pulsed brightly, its radiance becoming blinding as if it was feeding off their emotions, their fears. But Jack knew something the Draxians couldn't understand: they were stronger than this. Together, they had already faced death countless times in space. They had survived impossible odds. They could survive this, too. "We're not your prisoners," Jack shouted again, his voice cutting through the silence, growing stronger with each passing moment. "We're human beings, not your toys for judgment." The images that had once seemed so real started to flicker, distorting further as Jack's words echoed through the empty expanse. For a moment, the reality of the chamber seemed to warp. The oppressive feeling of the Draxians' judgment cracked, and Jack felt a surge of hope. He wasn't going to be trapped here, caught in the Draxians' game of illusion and manipulation. Emma stepped forward, her voice breaking through the chaos. "We've all made mistakes. But none of us deserve to be defined by them forever." Her eyes glinted with determination as she spoke, her words not just for the Draxians, but for herself too. "We're not perfect, but we don't need to be judged for things we didn't do, or things we can't change." Liam stood beside her, his posture strong and his voice steady. "We're more than our past," he said, his tone resolute. "We're here for a reason. We came to find answers, not to have our lives turned into a trial." The chamber responded to their unity. The blinding light of the orb flickered, and for the first time, the Draxian presence seemed to hesitate. It was subtle at first, a slight disturbance in the air, the vibrations of the chamber slackening as if the very fabric of the space was wavering. The Draxian leader's cold voice reverberated again, but now there was an edge of uncertainty to it. "You are not as powerless as we assumed. But your defiance is meaningless. The truth cannot be altered." The false memories began to ripple and shimmer, their hold over the three astronauts loosening. Jack felt a strange sensation, as if the images were slipping away from him, like sand running through his fingers. His father's face, his mother's pride, his first mission, it was all still there, but now they were his memories again, not the twisted shadows of guilt the Draxians had tried to force upon him. "No," Jack said firmly, shaking his head. "The truth isn't just about guilt and fear. The truth is about what we do next. What we choose to become. We choose to live. We choose to change." Emma stepped up to the orb, her gaze piercing. "We came here to stop the chaos, to prevent the war, not to stand trial for things we've already learned from. If you want to judge us for that." Liam's voice, though quieter, carried a defiant force. "We may have been lost, but we're not lost anymore. We're together, and we'll face whatever comes next, as a team. We don't need your judgment to tell us who we are." The chamber trembled once more, but this time it was different. The orb, which had been glowing brightly, began to dim, as if their defiance was somehow absorbing its power. The walls of the chamber, once towering and imposing, now seemed to shrink, losing their oppressive weight. The Draxian leader's voice came again, but it was more distant now, echoing with a hint of frustration. "You resist us." Jack stepped forward, closing the distance between them and the pulsating orb. "Yes, we do. And we always will." With one final, unified shout, the trio turned their collective energy toward the orb. The chamber erupted into a violent burst of light and sound, a clash of forces as the astronauts combined their strength, their unity, and their newfound understanding. The orb faltered, its pulse faltering, before it shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments that evaporated into the void. And then, the void was silent. The chamber, once overwhelming and terrifying, now felt empty. The weight that had pressed down on them seemed to lift entirely. It was as if the entire structure had exhaled, releasing the tension that had suffocated them. The distorted memories disappeared, leaving nothing but a pure, untainted expanse of quiet. Jack took a deep breath, his chest heaving as he steadied himself. He turned to Emma and Liam, who were both standing at his side, their faces pale but filled with determination. "We did it," Emma whispered, almost in disbelief. "Yeah," Liam said, his voice shaking slightly. "We broke through. But what does this mean now? What happens next?" Before Jack could answer, the Draxian leader's figure reappeared before them. This time, however, his form was less imposing, less absolute. His golden eyes were no longer sharp with the same unrelenting judgment. Instead, they were filled with something else, curiosity. "You have proven your strength," the Draxian leader said slowly, his voice now less cold, more contemplative. "Your resistance is not without merit. Perhaps you are not the simple trespassers we thought you to be." Jack squared his shoulders, looking the leader directly in the eye. "We came here for answers," he said firmly. "We want to understand what's really happening, and how we can stop it." The Draxian leader's gaze softened ever so slightly. "Then you may have earned the right to know. But be warned, what you learn may not be what you expect." With a wave of his hand, the chamber around them shifted again, the infinite void replaced by a strange, holographic map. The stars on the map were arranged in a pattern Jack didn't recognize, far beyond their known galaxy. "This is the true nature of the war you face," the Draxian leader intoned. "A war that has been hidden from you for eons. It is not only your survival that is at stake, but the survival of the very fabric of the universe." Jack, Emma, and Liam exchanged a glance. This was the moment. The truth was within reach. "Then show us," Jack said. "Show us what we need to do." The leader's golden eyes glinted with something ancient. "Very well. Prepare yourselves. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" The moment the Draxian leader spoke, the stars on the holographic map began to shift. It was as if they were being pulled and rearranged by an invisible force. Jack's eyes locked on the screen as constellations, galaxies, and nebulae, his understanding of the universe, began to rearrange into patterns he couldn't comprehend. The map expanded further and further, revealing areas of space that humanity had never even considered, let alone explored. Jack's breath caught in his chest. "This map," the Draxian leader's voice resonated through the chamber, "is a representation of the known universe, and of the unknown universe." Jack could feel the weight of the leader's words hanging in the air, the magnitude of what was being presented to them slowly sinking in. His mind raced as the holographic projections shifted again. The map began to zoom in on a dark region of space, an area that was, disturbingly, marked in a deep, pulsating red. "This is the heart of the conflict you will soon face," the Draxian continued. "The red zone. A pocket of space where the laws of physics bend, where reality itself distorts. This is where the war begins." Liam stepped forward, his voice full of caution. "What exactly is the red zone? And how are we supposed to stop it?" The Draxian's golden eyes flickered with a somber understanding. "The red zone is the birthplace of an ancient force, a species older than any known civilization. It is known as the Voidborn. Their purpose is to consume, to unravel the fabric of the universe itself." Jack's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, consume the fabric of the universe?" "They are not like us," the leader said, its tone colder now, as though speaking of an ancient terror. "They exist beyond your comprehension, beyond even the Draxian's knowledge. When the Voidborn awaken, they consume everything, planets, stars, entire galaxies, leaving nothing but a hollow void in their wake. The red zone is where they rest, waiting for their signal to awaken and begin their feast." A heavy silence filled the chamber. Jack, Emma, and Liam exchanged looks of disbelief, trying to grasp the enormity of what they were being told. The thought of an alien species capable of erasing entire sections of the universe, it was incomprehensible. The very existence of such a force challenged everything they thought they knew about the cosmos. "But why haven't we heard about this before?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. Why wasn't this information shared with humanity, or the Draxians, or anyone else? The Draxian leader's eyes dimmed as if recalling a painful truth. For eons, the Voidborn were contained, locked away by ancient civilizations that fell long before your species emerged. The knowledge of their existence has been hidden for fear that the universe might fall to ruin. Even we, the Draxians, only discovered fragments of this truth in our deepest explorations of space. Liam clenched his fists. So we're supposed to stop this force that's been dormant for eons, with nothing but a few crumbs of knowledge and some ancient warnings? You must understand, the Draxian leader said with a surprising softness, the Voidborn are not merely an external threat. Their existence alters everything around them. They have the ability to infect the minds of other species, corrupting them from within. The chaos and destruction they create spread like a disease, infecting entire civilizations, turning them into their servants. Even the most advanced species fall victim to them. Jack's pulse quickened. The implications of this were terrifying. If the Voidborn were able to infiltrate minds, to manipulate entire civilizations, then humanity, and even the Draxians, were in far greater danger than they'd realized. The map shifted once more, focusing on a specific star system in the outer rim of the galaxy, a system near the edge of the red zone. The star was flickering, dimming at irregular intervals. There, the Draxian leader said, pointing to the system. That is where the infection begins. It is already spreading, and your species is unwittingly at the center of it. Jack's head spun. What do you mean, we're at the center of it? The Draxian's golden eyes narrowed, their expression unreadable. The signal of the Voidborn, the force that awakens them, has already begun. It was activated when your species first ventured into space, when you began to explore the stars. The Voidborn fed on your curiosity, your drive to push beyond the boundaries of the known universe. You unlocked a door that should have remained closed. Jack felt a cold wave wash over him. Humanity's thirst for exploration, for discovery, it had led them to this point. Their ambition had awakened something ancient, something dark. We're not the cause of it, Emma said, her voice shaking with frustration. We didn't know. How were we supposed to know this would happen? The Draxian leader looked at her, his expression softening ever so slightly. You were not the first, nor will you be the last. But now you are the only hope. Liam stared at the map, his gaze hardened with resolve. What do we need to do? The Draxian leader did not hesitate. The red zone must be sealed. The Voidborn must be locked away again before they awaken fully. There is a device, an ancient artifact, hidden deep within the red zone. It is the only thing capable of containing them, an artifact built by civilizations long forgotten. You must retrieve it. Jack's mind raced, trying to piece everything together. A device, hidden in the heart of the red zone, capable of stopping the Voidborn. It sounded impossible, like a suicide mission. But the alternative, the end of the universe, was unthinkable. We'll do it, Jack said, his voice firm with determination. The Draxian leader tilted his head, seemingly studying Jack for a moment. Then he nodded. Very well. The path is treacherous, and the Voidborn's influence will be felt long before you reach the artifact. But if you succeed, you will save more than your species. You will save the universe itself. Jack looked at Emma and Liam. They had no choice. This was their mission now. They were no longer just explorers, but the last hope for the survival of all that they had known and loved. Let's do it, Jack said, his voice filled with resolve. The map flickered again, this time locking onto a new set of coordinates that would take them to the heart of the red zone. They were on the brink of something massive, and whatever came next would require everything they had. But they couldn't turn back now. The universe itself was counting on them. The chamber around them flickered, and with a deep, resonating hum, the Draxian leader's presence began to fade, his golden eyes dimming as if retreating into the shadows of a forgotten past. Jack, Emma, and Liam stood in stunned silence, the weight of their mission settling over them like a thick fog. They were no longer just astronauts, they were humanity's last chance to stop a cosmic force capable of wiping out everything in its path. And they were about to enter the heart of the red zone, a place where even the laws of physics bent to the will of the Voidborn. The Draxian leader had given them the coordinates to the artifact they needed to retrieve, but the journey to get there wasn't going to be easy. As Jack stared at the flickering holographic map, he could feel a deep sense of unease gnawing at his gut. This wasn't just an alien artifact they were after, it was the key to saving the universe, and it was hidden in a place more dangerous than anything they had ever faced. "We need to prepare," Jack said, his voice low but resolute. Emma nodded, her expression hardening. "Prepare for what, exactly? We don't even know what's waiting for us out there. The red zone is a black hole of chaos, literally and figuratively. And we're supposed to just fly into the heart of it?" "We don't have a choice," Liam said, stepping forward. "The Voidborn are already waking up. If we don't do something, it's game over. We've faced danger before. We can do it again." Jack turned to Liam, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The mission was uncertain, but the stakes had never been higher. "I know. But this is different. We're not just fighting against an enemy we can see. This is something much bigger, something that doesn't follow the rules. The red zone is beyond anything we've studied. We don't even know if we can survive it." Emma clenched her fists, the tension visible in her posture. "Then we'll make sure we do whatever it takes to survive." The three of them exchanged a glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them. No matter how impossible this mission seemed, they were in it together. They had no other choice. Humanity was counting on them. With that, they made their way back to the ship, the Astra, which had remained in orbit above the Draxian mothership. As they boarded, the familiar hum of the engines and the sterile metallic scent of the ship seemed strangely comforting. It felt like home amidst the chaos. "We're entering uncharted space," Jack said, as he took the helm of the Astra, his fingers brushing against the smooth controls. "We need to be ready for anything. Emma, check the shields, Liam, make sure the navigation system is online. We'll need to rely on every piece of tech we have to get through this." "I'm on it," Emma responded, heading to the auxiliary control panel to start diagnostics. Liam made his way to the navigation station, typing in the coordinates the Draxian leader had provided. His brow furrowed as the star charts shifted, but the system eventually locked onto the route. "Coordinates set. But Jack, look at this." Jack glanced at the screen, where Liam had pulled up a real-time simulation of their journey. It wasn't just the vast emptiness of space they would be navigating. The entire path to the red zone seemed to be filled with unpredictable gravitational anomalies, strange energy surges, and spatial distortions. The deeper they went, the more unstable the region became. "We're going to have to fly through some rough patches," Jack said, voice grim. Emma spoke up from behind them, her voice steady. "It's not just the space-time distortions. The red zone is alive in its own way. It's not just a location, it's a field of energy that could affect our minds, twist our perceptions, even mess with our ability to think clearly. The closer we get, the more the Voidborn's influence will be felt." Jack clenched his jaw. "So not only do we have to make it through, but we have to make sure we don't lose ourselves in the process." Liam was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing the navigation controls. "Well, we better hope we're stronger than whatever's out there." The engines roared to life, and the Astra began its journey toward the red zone. Jack's mind raced as the ship sliced through the vacuum of space, leaving behind the familiar stars and heading straight toward the unknown. As they accelerated, the stars ahead of them began to stretch and warp, bending in strange ways that didn't follow the logic of the universe as they knew it. "Hold on tight," Jack said, gripping the controls with a white-knuckled grip. "We're entering the red zone now." The Astra shuddered as they crossed the threshold. Space itself seemed to bend and twist, as though the very fabric of reality was giving way. The walls of the ship groaned as the gravitational waves pushed against them. Lights flickered. The stars outside the windows distorted into streaks of fiery red and black. Suddenly, the control panel let out a sharp beep. A warning flashed across the screen: gravitational disturbance, unstable region ahead. Emma quickly rushed to her station, her eyes scanning the diagnostics. "Jack, we've got energy spikes coming from the red zone. The closer we get, the worse it's going to get." "I see it," Jack said, grimacing. "We have to keep going. There's no turning back now." The ship bucked again, throwing them off balance. Jack barely kept the Astra steady as an intense gravitational pull from a nearby anomaly tried to rip them off course. He fought to maintain control, his knuckles turning white against the steering column. "Engines at full thrust," Emma shouted. "We've got to break through the distortion field before we lose power." Jack slammed his fist on the thruster button, sending a powerful burst of energy to the engines. The Astra surged forward, narrowly avoiding a series of destabilizing energy spikes that threatened to tear the ship apart. The gravitational forces kept tugging at them, the instability of the red zone warping spacetime itself, but they pressed on, the ship groaning under the pressure. "Just a little further," Jack muttered under his breath, sweat beading on his forehead. "We need to reach the artifact before everything unravels completely." Liam gripped the side of his seat, eyes darting between the navigation system and the window. "We're approaching the coordinates," he said, voice strained. "But this place, this isn't like anything we've ever seen. The laws of space aren't just bending here, they're outright breaking." "We knew it wouldn't be easy," Jack said, his jaw clenched. "Keep your focus. We're almost there." As the Astra plunged deeper into the red zone, the stars outside grew darker and more distant, their light twisting into eerie shapes. The air in the ship felt thick, almost suffocating. Jack could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on him, the threat of the void-born looming just beyond the horizon. But they couldn't stop now. Not when they were this close. "Brace yourselves," Jack said, as the ship hurtled toward the heart of the red zone, where the fate of the universe, and humanity, would be decided. The deeper they plunged into the red zone, the more the Astra seemed to become a part of the cosmic chaos. The ship groaned under the strain of unseen forces, as if the universe itself was trying to tear them apart. Jack kept his hands steady on the controls, but his mind raced. The stars outside the window had lost all semblance of their usual form. They twisted and writhed, their light shifting from brilliant whites and blues to sickly reds and blacks. The gravity wells they had passed through had been unsettling, but this was something worse. The very fabric of space seemed to be unstable here. Every instrument on the ship was giving them false readings, flashing warnings that made no sense. Time itself felt unreliable, what had felt like hours of travel now felt like minutes, and yet the stars outside seemed to crawl at a pace they couldn't quite follow. "Jack, we're entering a spacetime distortion," Emma said, her voice strained. "The ship's sensors are reading anomalies in all directions. We might not be able to track our position if we go too deep." "We can't turn back," Jack replied, his voice tight with resolve. "We're not getting any other chance to stop this. If we turn back now, it could be too late." Liam, who had been monitoring the external sensors, nodded in agreement. "I've never seen anything like this. The region around us is alive. The signals we're picking up, they're not natural. This isn't just a physical anomaly, it's something more. It's like the red zone is reacting to our presence." Jack glanced over at Liam, his gaze hard. "Whatever it is, we need to keep moving. We have a destination." The ship lurched again, throwing them into another destabilizing wave of gravitational distortion. The control panel flickered, and the lights in the cabin dimmed, leaving them bathed in a ghostly red glow from the exterior. Jack gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on the controls. He had to keep them steady. They couldn't afford another malfunction. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the turbulence ceased. A deathly stillness filled the cabin. For a moment, it felt like they were suspended in some kind of void. The stars had faded from the windows entirely, replaced by the blackness of the red zone. It was like the universe had disappeared altogether, leaving them floating in a vast, empty nothingness. Jack frowned. This doesn't feel right. The map says we're right on top of the coordinates. But there's nothing here. Liam was silent for a moment, then his voice cracked through the tension. No, Jack. There is something here. Ahead of them, a massive structure emerged from the darkness. It wasn't a ship, not in any traditional sense, but something far older, something alien. It was a colossal, monolithic structure, its surface etched with patterns that seemed to shift and pulse as though they were alive. The whole thing thrummed with a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate deep inside their bones. The ship stopped dead in its tracks as if it were being pulled by an invisible force toward the structure. It was impossible to look away, even though Jack had to force himself to breathe evenly. They were so close now. That's the artifact? Emma asked, her voice filled with awe and fear. Jack couldn't answer. The structure before them was so large that it dominated the entire field of view. It was like nothing they had ever seen, an aberration that bent all logic and reason. The lines on its surface seemed to be alive, shifting and reshaping as though the very essence of the object was in flux. But it was the sound, the hum, that seemed to draw them in. It was both soothing and terrifying. Yeah, Jack said after a long pause, that's it. Let's dock with it. They moved forward, the Astra slowly creeping toward the monolith. The closer they got, the more the strange energy field around it seemed to affect the ship. The instruments flickered, and strange noises emanated from the hull. The ship groaned, like it was fighting the pull of the structure itself. Jack, we've got a problem, Liam said, his voice tense. I'm reading an energy field around the structure. It's interfering with our shields. We're losing power. Keep it together, Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. We're almost there. We need to dock. The final stretch was the hardest. The Astra shuddered violently, its systems barely holding together as the energy field from the artifact assaulted them from every direction. The shields held for now, but Jack could feel the pressure mounting. Every moment was a countdown. They had to make it. Finally, with a violent jolt, the Astra made contact with the artifact's surface, the docking clamps locking into place with an almost otherworldly echo. The hum from the structure became deafening, shaking the very core of the ship. Everyone, suit up, Jack ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. We need to get inside, now. They moved quickly, the sense of urgency pressing down on them like a heavy weight. Each of them donned their spacesuits, and Jack motioned for Emma and Liam to follow him toward the airlock. The ship's interior lights flickered as they walked, the constant hum from the artifact vibrating through their bones. The airlock door slid open with a hiss, revealing the first step of their journey into the unknown. The surface of the artifact was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't metal, nor was it stone, it was something organic, its surface smooth yet pulsating, as though the structure itself were breathing. Jack led the way, taking cautious steps onto the surface. His boots made no sound, as if the very ground beneath him absorbed the impact. The sensation was unsettling, to say the least. Where do we go from here? Emma asked, her voice tight in her helmet. Jack glanced around, studying the shifting patterns on the surface. The pulsating lines seemed to form a path, a trail that wound deeper into the artifact. It was almost as if the structure was directing them. We follow the path, Jack said, voice firm. The artifact will lead us to what we need. They moved as one, following the trail etched into the surface. As they ventured deeper, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The hum of the structure became more intense, vibrating through the walls, the ground, and their bones. The closer they got to the heart of the artifact, the more the oppressive atmosphere seemed to weigh on them. Then, as they rounded a corner, the path suddenly opened into a massive chamber. It was vast, larger than anything they had ever seen, its ceiling stretching far beyond their sight. At the center of the chamber stood a towering object, surrounded by a strange, pulsing energy field. Jack's heart raced. This was it. The artifact wasn't just a device, it was something alive, something beyond their comprehension. But they had no choice now. They had come too far to turn back. "This is it," Jack said, his voice a mixture of awe and dread. "We're going to need to get close to the core. That's where we'll find the power to stop the Voidborn." The moment he stepped forward, the energy field flickered, and a voice, deep, ancient, and echoing, spoke from the depths of the chamber. "Who dares to disturb the sanctum of the Voidborn?" A chill ran down Jack's spine. They had been detected. The real challenge had only just begun. The voice echoed through the chamber, reverberating against the walls in a way that seemed to shake the very air around them. It was not a human voice, nor was it anything that belonged to any creature they had ever encountered. It was a sound that transcended language, a vibration that resonated deep within their souls, as if the very essence of the red zone had spoken. "Who dares to disturb the sanctum of the Voidborn?" The words were both a warning and an invitation, an acknowledgement of their presence, something far older, far more ancient, than anything they had ever come across in all their years of space exploration. Jack's hand instinctively went to the sidearm holstered at his waist, though he knew there would be little use for it in this situation. They were up against something far beyond their technology or understanding. The air around them seemed to pulse with energy, each beat making their hearts race in time with the eerie hum that filled the chamber. Jack motioned for Emma and Liam to stay close. They had made it this far, but the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his voice steady despite the churning fear that was rising inside him. "What do you want from us?" The question lingered in the air, but the response came not in words, but in a series of strange, shifting patterns on the walls of the chamber. The lines that had once appeared as mere designs began to form into images, images of an ancient battle, of star systems collapsing, of vast cosmic destruction. They were playing out in front of them, like some kind of memory trapped within the very walls of the artifact. The images shifted again, and now the walls showed something more specific, a glimpse of the Voidborn. They were not the monstrous beings Jack had imagined, but rather vast, shadowy entities with no distinct form, their bodies flickering like tendrils of darkness, shifting and undulating. Their eyes were filled with an endless, abyssal void, a nothingness that swallowed all light and life. Jack swallowed hard as the realization hit him, this was the true form of the Voidborn. They were not simply enemies to be fought, they were a force, an existence, that existed outside of time and space, bending reality to its will. They're not just a species," Emma murmured, her voice barely audible. "There's something more. They're a force of nature. A destroyer of worlds." Liam nodded grimly, his eyes wide with understanding. "It's like they feed on the collapse of entire civilizations. On the death of stars. They are the end." The hum around them intensified, and the walls vibrated. Then, the voice returned, this time not just from the artifact but seemingly from everywhere at once. "You seek to stop the Voidborn," the voice said, dripping with ancient malice. "You do not understand what you are meddling with. The red zone is not a place, it is a boundary. A threshold. A place where all things that are born and die come to rest. You cannot destroy us. We are eternal." Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the words sank in. "We don't need to destroy you. We just need to stop you from coming into our galaxy," he said, his voice filled with determination. "You may be eternal, but so is humanity's will to survive." There was a long pause, during which Jack could hear the deep, pulsating hum of the artifact as if the very words were being processed by something alive within it. Then, the voice responded, this time, with something akin to amusement. You are brave, human. But you are fools. Your will is fragile, your resolve fleeting. Do you not see? The Voidborn are not mere creatures. We are the balance. The universe cannot thrive without us, and it cannot survive without the chaos we bring. You have come to a place where you cannot win. You have no power here. Jack clenched his fists, refusing to be intimidated. We've beaten things before that we didn't understand. And we'll do it again. The walls of the chamber pulsed with a strange energy, and suddenly, a bright light flared from the center of the room. The artifact in front of them began to hum louder, the energy field around it intensifying until it felt like a physical presence pushing against them. The air grew thick with the pressure, and Jack felt as if the very atmosphere was trying to crush them. Liam gripped Jack's shoulder, his voice tight with urgency. Jack, we need to go. Now. The artifact is going into overload. It's going to. Before he could finish, the floor beneath them shook violently, and the chamber around them split open, revealing a yawning abyss beneath them. The once stable ground crumbled, sending them tumbling into the darkness below. Jack barely had time to react as the world seemed to shift beneath him. They fell, the void below opening wide as they plunged further into the heart of the artifact. Hold on. Jack shouted as he tried to steady himself in the air. His heart raced as the chamber above them closed in, and the darkness around them seemed to press in from every side. The world went black. When Jack opened his eyes, he was no longer in the chamber. His entire body ached, and the air around him was thick with the metallic scent of something burning. His helmet's visor was cracked, the fractured lines distorting his view. The Astra, their ship, was nowhere to be seen. In front of him, Emma and Liam were slowly getting to their feet, shaking off the disorientation of the fall. The three of them stood in a vast cavern, the walls of which seemed to pulse with strange, glowing symbols. Is everyone okay? Jack asked, his voice hoarse. Emma nodded, but she looked pale, the fear evident in her eyes. I think so. What the hell happened? Where are we? This is not the same place, Liam said, scanning their surroundings. This isn't the red zone anymore. It's something else. Some kind of nexus, maybe. Jack glanced around. They had fallen through some kind of rift, a tear in reality itself. But the further they looked, the more they realized the truth. This was no longer just a journey through the red zone, it was a journey into the heart of the Voidborn themselves. A low, terrifying hum filled the air again. And they weren't alone. Something was watching them. Jack, Emma whispered, we've entered their domain. And in that moment, Jack realized just how much further this journey had gone. The real test was only just beginning. The cavern stretched infinitely ahead, its walls lined with the same shifting, pulsating patterns they had seen on the artifact's surface. It was as if the very rock around them was breathing, shifting with every heartbeat of the universe. The air felt heavy, thick with a presence that was far too ancient and far too powerful to be comprehended. Every step they took seemed to echo in the cavern's vastness, as though their movements were being watched, analyzed, and catalogued by something unseen. Stay close, Jack ordered, his voice steady despite the unease that gnawed at him. They had no idea where they were or what kind of dangers lay ahead, but one thing was certain, they were no longer on their familiar path. The artifact had pulled them into something deeper, more primal. Something that existed beyond the reach of human understanding. Emma's face was pale, and her hand hovered near her weapon. She didn't speak, but Jack could tell she was as disoriented as he felt. Liam, on the other hand, seemed more focused, his eyes scanning the glowing symbols on the walls. These symbols, Liam said softly, they're not like anything in our database. It's not alien, it's something older. Pre-civilization, maybe. Great, Jack muttered. We're in a prehistoric tomb filled with hostile entities. Just what I always wanted. Liam didn't laugh. He was too focused on the glowing symbols. It's not a tomb. It's something else. I think, this is a place of power. A nexus, maybe. The Voidborn are tied to this realm, Jack. This is their core, their origin. And we're trespassing, Emma added dryly, her voice still carrying that edge of anxiety. Not that it's too late to turn back now. Jack glanced back over his shoulder at the abyss they had fallen from, the way the walls closed up behind them. The rift had sealed itself shut as soon as they fell through, leaving them trapped in this alien place. There was no turning back. We're not turning back, Jack said firmly. We've come this far, and we're going to stop the Voidborn from reaching our galaxy. Whatever this place is, it's part of the solution. Liam nodded, but his eyes flickered toward the shimmering symbols again, and Jack saw the uncertainty in his expression. I don't know if we're ready for this. These symbols, they don't just mark territory. They tell a story. And it's not a good one. As they walked deeper into the cavern, the eerie hum intensified. The walls seemed to close in on them, pressing down like they were being pulled into the very heart of the Voidborn's domain. Jack felt the pressure in his chest increase, a tangible sense of dread that gnawed at him with every step. Jack, Emma said, her voice barely a whisper, I don't think we're alone. He didn't need to ask her to elaborate. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as the atmosphere around them seemed to shift, darken. The air was charged with something malevolent. The floor beneath their feet rumbled, the vibration resonating through their bodies. Then, from the shadows ahead, something moved. A shape. Something dark and flowing, shifting in the darkness. It wasn't quite a figure, more like a presence, a shadow that bent and distorted reality itself. The shapes flickered like a mirage, too quick to fully grasp but unmistakable in their intention. Jack stepped forward instinctively, his eyes narrowing. Get ready. Suddenly, a deep, rumbling voice echoed from the cavern walls. It wasn't a voice like the one they had heard in the artifact, this one was different, more personal, more immediate, more menacing. Fools! You dare trespass into the heart of the Voidborn. You think you can stop us? You are nothing but insects, crawling at the edges of something far beyond your understanding. The shadowy form in front of them solidified, taking on a more distinct shape, an amorphous figure, its body composed of swirling darkness, its eyes glowing with a cold, unfeeling light. Jack's pulse quickened, and his hand instinctively went to the blaster at his side. He could feel the power radiating off the creature. This wasn't just some mindless beast, it was something sentient. And it was angry. We've come to stop you, Jack said firmly, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. The Voidborn can't have our galaxy. Your reign ends here. The shadow creature laughed, if it could be called that. It wasn't a laugh that expressed joy or amusement, it was a laugh of inevitability. The kind of laugh you hear just before the world ends. You think you can stop the inevitable, the voice hissed. The Voidborn are not bound by your petty human desires. We are eternal. We are the beginning and the end. You are merely delaying the inevitable. The creature moved closer, its form coiling and twisting with a fluidity that was almost hypnotic. Jack fought the urge to step back, to run. They couldn't afford to lose their ground here. We've been through worse than you, Emma shot back, her voice fierce. And we're still standing. The creature's dark form rippled, almost as if it was considering her words. Then it spoke again, but this time, its tone was different, less certain, more intrigued. You are not like the others, it said slowly. Most have fallen before us. But you have fought. You have persisted. Perhaps there is more to your species than we thought. Jack's grip tightened on his weapon. That's right, he said, his voice low. And we're going to fight until the end. The creature paused, the air around them thick with tension. For a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, the creature lunged, its dark form rushing toward them with terrifying speed. Jack didn't have time to think. He fired. The blaster shot streaked through the air, hitting the creature's form with a blast of energy. The shot didn't seem to penetrate. Instead, the darkness rippled and absorbed the energy, making the creature grow even larger. Pathetic, the creature hissed. Your weapons are useless against us. We are beyond your technology. The air in the cavern seemed to shift, and the creature extended tendrils of darkness toward them. They moved with lightning speed, slithering through the air like snakes, seeking to ensnare them. Move! Jack shouted, grabbing Emma and Liam and pulling them to the side. The tendrils whipped past them, narrowly missing their suits. They couldn't outrun it. They couldn't outgun it. Jack's mind raced. There had to be another way. The creature was powerful, but it was still tied to this place, to the heart of the Voidborn. The artifact, the core, was the key. Emma, Liam, Jack said, his voice urgent. We have to reach the core. The artifact's heart. It's the only chance we have. Liam nodded, his eyes already scanning the cavern. There, he said, pointing toward a faint glow in the distance, beyond the creature. The core. It's there. Without another word, they ran. The creature howled in fury behind them, but they didn't look back. The cavern's walls seemed to close in as they sprinted toward the glowing core. Every step felt heavier, the oppressive force of the Voidborn bearing down on them, but they had no choice. They had to reach it. It was their only hope. The hum grew louder, and the cavern seemed to shake with each step they took. The creature wasn't far behind. But they were almost there. Jack could feel it. The heart of the Voidborn. And they were going to destroy it. The cavern stretched endlessly, the walls alive with a disturbing, rhythmic pulse. The glow ahead intensified, its light becoming blinding. It was coming from the heart of the Voidborn, an entity that transcended anything they had ever encountered, a place where the fabric of space and time seemed to warp, where their every movement felt like it was being watched, judged, and perhaps even manipulated. Jack's heart raced as they pushed forward, the oppressive atmosphere weighing down on them. Each footstep echoed in the vast emptiness of the cavern. Their suits, which had once provided a sense of safety, now felt like little more than thin barriers against the ancient power that lurked all around them. The creature's growls echoed in the distance, the tendrils of shadow trailing after them like an ominous wave. Every so often, one of those tendrils would snap toward them, narrowly missing and leaving a trail of darkness in its wake. Faster! Jack shouted, urging the team forward. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not when they were so close. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the core. At the center of the cavern stood a massive structure, an enormous, crystalline formation that radiated a brilliant, eerie light. It wasn't a physical object, but more like a living thing, pulsating with the rhythm of a heart, alive, breathing, and filled with untold power. The energy it exuded was overwhelming, pulling at their very beings, as if it was trying to draw them in and consume them. This is it, Liam said breathlessly, his eyes wide as he stared up at the glowing mass. This is the source. Jack's mind raced. The core was alive. And the Voidborn were somehow linked to it. But how could they stop it? How could they destroy something that was the source of their power? We need to disable it, Jack said, his voice tight. If we can disrupt its energy, it might weaken the Voidborn. We've seen their technology before, maybe we can find a way to do the same here. Liam nodded, pulling up a holographic interface on his wrist. I'll scan for any weaknesses. If this is anything like the artifact, there has to be a core component that we can exploit. Just keep an eye out. The creature's not far behind. Jack didn't need to be told twice. He scanned the room, his eyes constantly darting between the pulsating core and the shadows that seemed to be creeping closer. The creature's growls grew louder, more menacing. It was getting closer. Liam, hurry up. Emma said, her voice strained. We don't have much time. Liam worked quickly, his fingers moving deftly across the interface. The screen in front of him flickered, the holographic symbols shifting as his scan deepened. A few tense moments passed, and then, he finally spoke, his voice grim. I found something. There's a central node inside the core. It's emitting a high-frequency pulse, like a beacon. If we can disrupt it, it might destabilize the core long enough to neutralize the Voidborn's hold on this place. Jack's mind raced. A beacon. The Voidborn were using it to maintain their connection to this place, to channel their power. But how do we destroy it? Emma asked, her eyes never leaving the shadows that seemed to move closer. Liam hesitated. I can't say for sure. But if we hit it with a concentrated burst of energy, it might be enough to overload it. Jack's pulse quickened. Do we have anything powerful enough to do that? Liam tapped his wrist again. I think I can reroute the energy from our suits into a single burst, but it's going to take a lot of time to set up. We're going to have to hold the line until it's ready. Jack's heart sank. They were running out of time. The creature was almost upon them. He glanced back. The dark, shifting form of the Voidborn's minion emerged from the shadows, tendrils snapping toward them. Its form flickered, almost like an illusion, but there was no mistaking the malice in its glowing eyes. It was going to kill them, if it could. We'll hold it off, Jack said, his voice full of resolve. You just make sure that burst works. Don't make me wait too long, Liam replied, his voice strained as he continued working on his interface. Jack turned to face the creature, positioning himself between it and his team. He raised his weapon, ready to fire. The creature snarled and stretched its dark tendrils toward them. It wasn't just a beast anymore, it was a manifestation of pure darkness, a living embodiment of the Voidborn's will. It wasn't something they could simply shoot at and hope to stop. It was beyond them. But Jack wasn't going to let that stop him. He fired, his shots hitting the creature's shadowy form. The blasts lit up the darkness briefly, but the creature absorbed the energy, its form rippling and growing more formidable. Emma, use the distraction. Jack shouted. He nodded toward the glowing core, the unstable energy building within it. Emma took the cue, raising her rifle and firing a few quick bursts at the creature to keep it occupied. The creature hissed in anger, turning toward Emma and lashing out with a tendril. But Jack was ready. He fired again, this time aiming for a point on the creature's side where its form seemed weakest. The shot landed, and the creature recoiled, its tendrils jerking in confusion. It howled in pain, but its recovery was swift. This wasn't enough. Jack needed to buy them more time. He backed up slowly, positioning himself between the creature and the glowing core. The energy around them was growing more intense, the hum of the core vibrating through the cavern, shaking the very air. They were so close. They just needed a little longer. Liam was working furiously now, his face flushed with concentration as he fiddled with his interface. He was close, Jack could feel it. They were running out of time, but he couldn't give up now. Not when they were this close. The creature lunged again, its tendrils cutting through the air like whips. Jack fired another shot, grazing one of the tendrils, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The creature was faster, more agile than anything they had faced before. Jack! Emma cried out as she fired another round at the creature, barely missing. It's coming! The creature surged forward, its form now a terrifying mass of shadows and shifting tendrils. Jack didn't hesitate. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the tendrils that lashed toward him. But they were almost there. Liam's voice came through, shaking with urgency. Jack, I'm almost done. I need 10 more seconds. 10 seconds. They couldn't hold the line for much longer. The creature was relentless, its glowing eyes filled with fury. Jack could feel the darkness pressing in on them, could hear the creature's voice, low and threatening. You cannot win, the creature hissed. The Voidborn are inevitable. Jack gritted his teeth. Not today. He fired again, his weapon crackling with the last of its energy. And then, just as the creature surged toward them once more, Liam's voice cut through the air. It's ready. Get clear. Jack didn't hesitate. He turned and sprinted toward the core. The creature screeched behind them, its tendrils reaching out, but it was too late. The burst of energy from Liam's device shot through the cavern, striking the central node of the core. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, the cavern erupted in light and sound, a massive explosion of energy that sent shockwaves through the ground. The creature shrieked as its form destabilized, flickering and dissipating into nothingness. And then, the core, its pulsating light, flickered one last time and went dark. The explosion of light was blinding, and the shockwave knocked them off their feet. Jack felt himself thrown backward, his body slamming against the rocky ground. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, he thought he might never stand again. The air around him buzzed with the remnants of the energy that had been released. His ears rang, and the world around him spun. For a moment, he lay there, disoriented, his breathing shallow. His suit had taken the brunt of the impact, but he could still feel the ache in his bones, the bruising sensation of being hit by a force far greater than anything he'd ever experienced before. Slowly, the noise began to fade, and the world around him came back into focus. The oppressive weight in the air had lifted. The hum of the cavern had quieted. It was eerily still, almost like the entire realm had exhaled in relief, as though the Voidborn's grip on this place had been severed. Jack! Jack, are you all right? Emma's voice cut through the silence, urgent and concerned. Jack blinked, trying to clear his head. His vision was blurry at first, but after a few seconds, everything came back into focus. He could see Emma standing nearby, her suit covered in dust but otherwise unharmed. Liam was crouched down, tapping rapidly on his interface as he examined the now darkened core. I'm good, Jack grunted, pushing himself up and checking his surroundings. What the hell just happened? Liam looked up, his face a mix of exhaustion and relief. We did it. We destabilized the core. The Voidborn's connection to this place is severed. The energy burst overloaded the node, disrupting the pulse that kept them bound to this realm. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. So, it's over. We stopped them. For a moment, Liam seemed to hesitate, his eyes flicking back toward the now dormant core. Not exactly, he said quietly. The Voidborn are still out there, and this place, this realm, it's still part of their network. We've delayed them, but I'm not sure how long that delay will last. Jack's stomach dropped. They had done something, yes, but the looming threat of the Voidborn still lingered. What does that mean for us? Emma asked, her voice hard. She was trying to keep her composure, but Jack could see the exhaustion creeping into her eyes. Liam stood up and brushed off his suit, still looking uneasy. It means we need to get out of here. Now. The core might be disabled, but the Voidborn are adaptable. They'll figure out a way to re-establish their connection here, and when they do, this place will come back to life. We need to get back to the artifact, get the data we need, and figure out how to stop them for good. Jack nodded, his mind already racing. The clock was ticking. The Voidborn were not going to give up so easily. You're right, he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. We need to move quickly. He turned and glanced around the cavern, still disorienting in its vastness, but now strangely quiet. The shadows that had haunted them before were gone. The Voidborn's presence had dissipated, but Jack knew better than to think it was over. This was only the beginning. Emma checked her weapon, making sure it was fully charged. Let's not wait around to find out what comes next. The trio moved forward, their steps cautious but determined. As they walked, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even though they saw no sign of life. The cavern was dead silent, the only sound now being the echo of their boots on the stone floor. Liam led the way, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. The data from his interface flickered intermittently, showing fragments of information about the core and the Voidborn. "There's more I need to figure out," he muttered to himself. "We've only scratched the surface, but I think the artifact. I think it might have more information about the Voidborn than we realized." The mention of the artifact brought Jack back to the gravity of their mission. They had to reach it. They couldn't leave without the answers they needed. The fight against the Voidborn wasn't over, not by a long shot. They had only severed one of their many lifelines. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the place where they had first fallen through the rift. The once vibrant glow of the cavern was now dim, a dull hue that reflected their weariness. Jack looked up, scanning the walls of the cavern, wondering how they could reverse the rift and make their way back to the safety of the surface. "We need to find a way out," Jack said. "Liam, any ideas?" Liam was already examining the walls, his fingers tapping on his interface as he analyzed the data. "There should be a way to reverse the energy flow," he said slowly, his brow furrowing. "If we can find the energy conduit, we might be able to reopen the rift and get back to the artifact. But we're going to need the right coordinates." "That's not a problem," Jack replied. "We've got the artifact's coordinates. We just need to find a way to use them here." "Agreed," Liam said, his fingers flying over his interface. "I'll start working on a reactivation sequence." As Liam worked, Jack turned to Emma. She was staring into the distance, her expression contemplative. "You okay?" Jack asked quietly, noticing the unease in her eyes. She glanced at him and nodded, though the tension in her face hadn't gone away. "I'm fine. Just thinking." Jack understood. It was hard not to think about what they had just been through, what they had barely survived. The whole situation was more than just physically exhausting. It was psychologically draining. The Voidborn were no longer an abstract threat, they were a tangible force, and they had learned just how far-reaching their influence was. "Don't worry," Jack said softly, "we'll get through this." Emma gave him a small, tight-lipped smile. "I hope so." Liam's voice broke the silence. "I've got it." Jack turned toward him. "What's the plan?" Liam looked up, his eyes determined. "I've found the energy conduit. It's just ahead. We'll need to adjust the parameters and re-establish the connection with the artifact's core. Once we do that, we should be able to open the rift and return to the artifact's location." Jack's heart raced. This was it, the last step. They were so close to finding the answers they needed, but the risks were higher than ever. "Let's do it," Jack said, his voice low but resolute. The trio moved forward, Liam leading the way. The air felt different now, as if the cavern itself was holding its breath. They passed the remnants of the darkened core, now little more than a shadow of its former self. There was no sign of the Voidborn, but Jack knew they weren't out of danger yet. They reached the energy conduit, a twisted mass of metal and glowing cables that hummed with barely contained power. It was like a heartbeat, thumping in time with their own. Liam knelt down and began to interface with the conduit, his fingers flying over the holographic screen. "I'm starting the sequence," he said, voice tense. "We need to be ready. This could trigger a collapse in the structure." Jack nodded. "We'll be ready." A low hum began to reverberate through the cavern. The walls shook again, but this time, the vibration wasn't malevolent. It was the sound of the rift being reactivated. Jack could feel the air around them shifting as the energy built. In that moment, Jack knew they had done everything they could. The next step was beyond their control. They had to get out. And they had to do it before the Voidborn found a way to return. The air around them was thick with anticipation. As the low hum of the energy conduit vibrated through the cavern, Jack could feel the ground beneath him subtly shifting, like the entire place was waking up from a long slumber. The feeling in his gut, an unsettling mix of anxiety and excitement, only grew stronger with each passing second. They were on the brink of something monumental, and yet, the danger felt even more imminent now. The Voidborn were relentless. Even if they got out of here, Jack knew the battle was far from over. Liam's fingers flew over the interface, his brow furrowed in concentration. The conduit was coming to life, the energy flowing through it with an intensity Jack had never felt before. It was unlike anything he had experienced on Earth, a raw, almost tangible force that pulsed through the air like an electric current. "This is it," Liam muttered, mostly to himself, as he worked to stabilize the sequence. His hands shook slightly, either from exhaustion or the overwhelming pressure of the situation. Jack glanced back at Emma. Her face was tight with concern, but there was a determination in her eyes. Jack could see the same resolve in her that he felt in himself. They'd come so far, fought so hard to get to this point, and now, all they had to do was get through this last hurdle. "We're almost there," Liam said, his voice steady, but tinged with an edge of urgency. "Just a few more adjustments. If everything goes according to plan, the rift will reopen, and we can make it back to the artifact." Jack exhaled slowly, trying to suppress the gnawing anxiety in his chest. "We're ready. Just, make it happen." Liam didn't respond right away, his focus absolute as he made the final adjustments to the sequence. A burst of light flashed from the conduit, followed by a low rumble that seemed to echo through the very bones of the cavern. Jack's heart raced. They were so close. If this worked, they could leave this place behind and finally find the answers they needed. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them cracked. A deafening crack split the air, followed by a violent tremor that shook the entire cavern. Jack's stomach lurched as the floor buckled and split apart, sending rocks tumbling down into the abyss below. A deep, resonating roar reverberated through the walls. Jack felt the familiar sensation of the Voidborn's presence, a dark, oppressive force creeping into the very fabric of the air around them. "No!" Liam shouted, scrambling to stabilize the sequence. "The energy's destabilizing. We've triggered something." Jack's mind raced. This was it, the Voidborn weren't going to let them escape so easily. The rift was reopening, but it was doing so violently, as if the cavern itself was rejecting the intrusion. The air grew colder, and the familiar hum of the conduit became a deafening screech as it struggled to maintain its energy flow. "Emma, move!" Jack yelled, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her out of the way as a massive stone slab fell just inches from where they had been standing. They had no time to waste. "Liam, can you fix this?" Emma shouted, her voice strained as she ducked behind a large rock for cover. The walls trembled again, and a low growl filled the air. Jack knew that the Voidborn's creature, the one they had just barely escaped, was coming. "I'm trying." Liam gritted through his teeth. "If I can restabilize the energy flow, we can reopen the rift, but I need more time." Jack's pulse hammered in his ears. The ground beneath them was falling apart, the cavern crumbling into chaos. The roar of the Voidborn creature grew louder. It was getting closer. "Move!" Jack barked, turning toward the entrance to the cavern. The rift was ahead, but it was growing unstable. The energy was fluctuating, its bright, erratic pulses dancing along the edges of the cavern like an angry storm. "We can't leave Liam," Emma shouted, her face pale. But Jack could see the panic in her eyes. She knew the consequences of staying too long. Jack's eyes met Liam's, who was still furiously working, his interface flickering as sparks flew from it. "Liam, we need to go now." Liam didn't look up, his fingers moving frantically across the interface. "I can do it, Jack. I just need a little more time, just a little." "Liam." Jack's voice was sharp, cutting through the chaos. The walls trembled again, and dust rained down from the ceiling. They were running out of time. The sound of tendrils snapping through the air, followed by a guttural growl, made the decision for him. They couldn't wait any longer. Jack grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her toward the unstable rift that flickered on the far side of the cavern. Behind them, the void-born creature's tendrils whipped through the air, seeking them out with terrifying precision. "Liam, we're going!" Jack yelled over his shoulder. "Get to the rift now." Liam's eyes flickered up briefly, and Jack saw the pain in his expression. But then, Liam nodded, as if he realized the futility of staying behind. He quickly input the last commands into the interface. The energy in the cavern was reaching a critical level, but it was still enough to trigger the opening. There was a sudden blinding light. The rift exploded into existence with a burst of energy that sent Jack flying off his feet. He could hear the void-born creature screech, its rage echoing through the cavern, but it was too late. The rift was open. "Go!" Jack shouted, scrambling to his feet and grabbing Emma by the arm. They didn't look back. They couldn't afford to. The rift swirled with dark energy, a vortex that seemed to beckon them in, promising escape. The world around them began to disintegrate, the walls, the floor, the very air around them, was breaking apart. The rift, though chaotic, offered their only hope of survival. Jack felt a surge of energy as they leapt through the rift, feeling as if his body was being torn apart and reconstructed in an instant. The void around them closed with a violent snap, leaving nothing behind but silence. When Jack's feet hit solid ground again, the world was different. They stood in a completely new place, on a barren, rocky landscape that stretched for miles. The sky was a dull, unnatural color, filled with clouds that seemed to swirl in patterns that defied logic. The air was cold and thin, but they were alive. They had made it. Jack's breath came in ragged gasps as he looked around, taking in their new surroundings. The eerie quiet of the new realm settled around them. They had escaped the Voidborn's clutches, for now. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another beginning. What the hell just happened? Emma whispered, her voice barely audible as she scanned their surroundings. Liam slowly stood, brushing himself off and breathing deeply. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said quietly. "This is just another part of the Voidborn's domain. But I think, we've gained a little time. Time to figure out how to finish what we started." Jack nodded grimly. They were far from finished, but they had one advantage now, the element of surprise. The real fight was just beginning. The landscape around them felt alien, desolate and yet, strangely familiar. Jack's boots crunched against the dry, cracked earth, the ground beneath him offering no comfort. It was as if they had stepped into a place where time itself didn't exist, a world outside the known realms. The air was cold, but it wasn't freezing. The wind blew intermittently, carrying with it a sharp, metallic scent that made Jack's skin crawl. "Where the hell are we?" Emma asked, her voice echoing in the eerie stillness. She scanned the horizon, her eyes narrowing as she looked for any sign of life or, at the very least, a landmark that could offer a hint about where they had landed. Liam was staring at his interface, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm not sure," he said, his voice tense. "The rift opened up, but the data doesn't match anything from Earth. This place doesn't seem to belong to any known dimension in the system I've been tracking. It's different." Jack looked around, his unease growing with every passing second. The landscape stretched endlessly before them, jagged mountains in the distance, and twisted, gnarled trees scattered throughout the desolate terrain. The sky, an odd mix of purples and grays, hung low and oppressive. It didn't look like any world they had encountered so far, certainly not one that had been marked on any maps, let alone their own mission data. "I don't like this," Emma muttered, adjusting her weapon. She had a good reason to be on edge, after all, this was uncharted territory. They had barely escaped the Voidborn's grasp, and now they were stuck in some strange new realm. If there were any remnants of the Voidborn here, or worse, a new threat, they would be in serious trouble. "We need to move," Jack said, taking a step forward. "We can't stay here too long. We don't know what's waiting for us. Liam nodded, keeping his attention on the fluctuating readings on his interface. I'll try to find a way to get a better sense of our location, he said. But we need shelter first, this place doesn't feel stable. I'm sensing some unusual energy patterns ahead. Jack nodded, instinctively placing himself between Liam and Emma, as they began moving forward. Their steps were cautious, as though any wrong move could trigger something they weren't prepared for. They passed through craggy, rocky terrain, the ground beneath them shifting unpredictably. Each gust of wind made the twisted trees groan, as if they were alive, and Jack could almost hear whispers on the wind, but he quickly dismissed it as a trick of the environment. As they walked, the sound of their footsteps was muffled by the strange, thick air. They had been walking for what felt like hours, but there was no sign of anything familiar, a settlement, a structure, or even an animal. It was as though they were the only living beings on the planet, surrounded by an emptiness that pressed in on all sides. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of walking, they reached a small rise in the land, and from there, they could see something, a flicker of movement in the distance. Jack squinted into the horizon, trying to make sense of it. Is that a building? Emma asked, pointing toward the faint silhouette on the horizon. Liam stepped forward, peering into the distance. I'm not sure. But it's the first sign of something that resembles civilization. Jack's pulse quickened. Let's check it out. They set off toward the structure, the air around them growing colder as they approached. The ground underfoot became more uneven, and the landscape seemed to warp in strange ways, as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to bend. They moved quickly but carefully, always keeping their wits about them. As they neared the structure, it became clearer. It was a tall, spindly tower-like building, constructed from materials that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the sky. There were strange symbols etched into its surface, symbols that neither Jack nor Liam could recognize. They had no way of knowing what they meant, or what they might signify about the culture or species that might have built it. This doesn't look like anything we've seen before, Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is, beyond anything we've encountered. It feels wrong. They reached the base of the tower, where the entrance appeared to be a large, dark archway. It was impossibly tall, with strange energy emanating from the doorway, and for a moment, Jack wondered if it was some kind of trap. But they had come too far to turn back now. Jack stepped forward, cautiously placing a hand against the smooth surface of the arch. It hummed softly beneath his touch, a vibration that made his teeth rattle, as if it recognized his presence. He glanced back at Emma and Liam, who both looked as wary as he felt. Are we really doing this? Emma asked, a hint of doubt in her voice. We don't have a choice, Jack said, his voice resolute. If we're going to find the artifact and stop the Voidborn once and for all, we have to see this through. With a deep breath, Jack moved toward the entrance. To his surprise, as his fingers brushed against the arch, the dark energy surrounding it flickered, and the doors slid open with an eerie hiss, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The inside of the tower was like nothing they had ever seen before. The walls shimmered with a strange energy, casting an otherworldly glow across the chamber. Strange glyphs floated in the air, their meanings indecipherable, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, as if the tower itself was alive, observing them. Liam stepped in first, his scanner already pinging with data, his fingers moving rapidly as he took in every detail. This place, it's definitely some kind of technology, he said, his voice low. But it's beyond anything we have on Earth, or anywhere else. We need to be careful, Jack said. This could be another part of the Voidborn's network, or worse. As they ventured deeper into the tower, the floor beneath their feet began to shift, and the air grew thicker. They reached the heart of the tower, where a massive, pulsating core lay at its center, its energy reaching out to them like an invisible hand. It was the source of the strange glow that had illuminated the chamber. The core seemed to pulse with life, as if it were alive itself. Liam stood in front of it, staring up in awe. This is incredible. Jack stepped forward, feeling a strange pull toward the core. He couldn't explain it, but something about it felt familiar, almost as if it was calling to him. Is this it? Emma asked, her voice laced with apprehension. Is this where we find the answers? Liam didn't respond right away. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling slightly as he analyzed the core. I think so, he said, his voice shaking. But I don't think we're alone here. The atmosphere in the tower suddenly shifted, a presence creeping through the air like a shadow. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. Someone, was watching them, and he knew in his gut that they were no longer safe. Get ready, Jack warned, his hand instinctively going to the weapon at his side. The silence was broken by a low, ominous growl that reverberated through the chamber, and the glow of the core flared brightly. Something was coming, and they were about to face the unknown. The real battle was about to begin. The air in the tower thickened, an electric charge building in the atmosphere. Jack's heart hammered against his chest, each beat loud and heavy in his ears. He could feel the presence surrounding them now, pressing in from all sides. It wasn't just the eerie glow of the core, it was something far darker, a deep, primal force that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the strange energy emanating from the walls. The growl from earlier had stopped, but the sensation of being hunted lingered, like a heavy weight pressing on his chest. Get ready, Jack said, his voice calm despite the gnawing unease crawling through his veins. His eyes darted around the chamber, looking for any sign of movement. The glyphs that floated in the air flickered, growing dim and then bright again, as if they were reacting to the energy disturbance. Emma's hand instinctively went to the sidearm holstered at her waist. I don't like this, she muttered under her breath, her gaze flickering toward the dark recesses of the tower. She glanced at Liam, who was now studying the core with a mix of awe and dread. Liam's fingers danced over his interface, but his screen was no help. Whatever this is, it's not something I can analyze with this tech. This place is different. It's like nothing we've seen before. Jack didn't need to be a tech genius to know that they were deep in uncharted territory now. The presence, the low hum of the core, it all felt like a trap, an inevitable conclusion to their journey. But there was no turning back. We're not alone, Jack said, his voice growing more firm. Something's here, and it's not friendly. Before anyone could respond, the glow from the core intensified, casting long, terrifying shadows across the walls. The ground beneath their feet rumbled, the vibrations rippling through the air, rattling their bones. And then, the walls began to shift. The tower groaned, as if it were alive, as if it were awakening from a long slumber. The glyphs in the air expanded, their movements no longer random, but purposeful, swirling around in complex patterns that seemed to form words in a language none of them could understand. They pulsed with energy, their glow flickering with an unnatural intensity. Jack's eyes darted to the archway they had entered through, but the entrance was gone. The once wide opening had sealed, leaving them trapped in the heart of the tower. There was no way out now. Whatever waited for them, they had to face it. A deep, resonating sound reverberated through the chamber, and the core in the center of the room pulsed faster, its light expanding outward in waves. It was like a heartbeat, slow and rhythmic, and with each pulse, the very air around them seemed to ripple and distort. The shadows lengthened, gathering around the perimeter of the room like dark tendrils, moving closer, growing thicker. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, tall, imposing, and cloaked in shadow. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were obscured by an ethereal, swirling fog. Its eyes burned with an unnatural light, like twin suns that pierced through the dimness, and its presence was overwhelming, almost suffocating. Welcome, the figure's voice boomed, its words reverberating through the chamber, as though the walls themselves were speaking. It wasn't just a voice, it was a sensation, a pressure that seemed to invade Jack's mind, pushing against his thoughts. Jack instinctively reached for his weapon, but his hand faltered. The figure, whatever it was, didn't seem to be fully tangible, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. It was both everywhere and nowhere at the same time. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his voice steady despite the fear that curled in his gut. The figure's form shimmered, and then, it spoke again, its voice layered with an ancient, almost godlike resonance. "I am the Watcher. I am the guardian of this place, the last remnants of an ancient power. The core you seek is not meant for your kind." Emma's eyes narrowed, her weapon still raised. "We don't have time for games. We need to leave, now." The Watcher let out a soft laugh, and for a moment, the sound felt like the wind howling through a hollow canyon, empty and cold. "You cannot leave. Not yet. You have come to this place for a reason. The artifact you seek is within reach. But first, you must prove your worth." "Prove our worth?" Liam repeated, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "What does that even mean?" The Watcher's glowing eyes locked onto Liam, its gaze piercing into him like a blade. "It means that you must face the trials of this place. Only those who are worthy may claim the power that lies at the heart of this world. Only those who survive the trials may wield the artifact you seek." Jack clenched his fists. "We've already fought enough battles to get here. We didn't come all this way just to play games with you." The Watcher seemed unfazed, its form flickering like an illusion. "You misunderstand. These are not games. These are the final tests of survival. Fail, and you will be lost to the void. Succeed, and you will gain the power to reshape your reality." Jack's mind raced. The trials. The power to reshape reality. It all sounded too good to be true. There had to be a catch. There always was. "What do you want from us?" Jack asked, his tone low, careful. The Watcher's form stretched upward, becoming even taller, until it seemed to tower over them. Its voice dropped to a near whisper, like a breeze rustling through the trees. "I want nothing from you. But the core, the artifact, it is part of a greater cycle. And you, Jack of Earth, are the key." Jack froze. His heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, I'm the key?" The Watcher didn't answer immediately. It floated closer, the air growing colder as it did. "You will understand soon enough. The trials you face will force you to confront not just this world, but your own fears. Your past. The truth of your journey." Jack's mind raced as he thought of the trials they had already endured, the rifts, the Voidborn, the constant fight to survive. But this was different. This was something more personal. Something deeper. "Enough with the cryptic nonsense," Emma snapped, her voice sharp. "We're not here for riddles. If we're going to fight, let's get it over with." The Watcher's eyes flickered, and then, it spoke one final time. "Very well. The trials begin now." Suddenly, the room shifted. The walls seemed to warp, the air thickened, and the shadows at the edge of the room surged forward, taking shape, becoming monstrous, hideous figures with glowing eyes. They were like nothing Jack had ever seen before, twisted, nightmarish creatures that roared with ferocity. The trials had begun. "Stay close," Jack shouted, his voice echoing in the chaos. He felt the weight of the Watcher's words, the looming presence of the creatures. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their very souls. As the first of the creatures lunged forward, Jack steeled himself. This was the moment. The final battle had begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?